We are live. Tennis Talk Daily. Uncut. Uncut Tennis Talk. Got a setup here where I can actually reach the camera, so that makes it a lot easier. I am just coming on here. We're going to wait for a few folks to join on. Hopefully there's some folks here on this wonderful Saturday afternoon. At least it's an afternoon here in Boston. So much to talk about. The catsuit. So much to talk about. Federer's practice session. Apparently, I have an operative that told me about Federer's recent practice sessions. And many, many comments in response to my past videos. I love your comments. I learn from your comments. I have one person that loves to talk about the pronunciations, and she teaches me. And I think I finally got David Goffin, which is not correct. It's David Goffin. David Goffin. That's what it is. So, hello. Let's see, not now. I'm going to turn this off so I can see you. Farzan, my buddy. Yes, well, we're trying. We're trying to give you the uncut tennis talk, my friend. We want to give you the uncut tennis talk, live and uncut. Rough edges and all. Mistakes and all. But, man, I watched that Steve Johnson versus Carreño Busta match last night. It was sort of interesting to watch those two play. Of course, Steve Johnson came through in straight sets, sort of dominated that match. I don't know if you know a lot about Steve Johnson, folks. Hello, well, Farzan, you're calling me a YouTube star. Well, maybe one day. Maybe one day. Farzan asks, I'm curious, what did you hear about the court speeds? Heard it to be slow. Well, there again, the evidence suggests that it's going to be slower than faster, a little faster than Indian Wells, but slower than Cincinnati for the recent basis for comparison. But they're always tweaking the courts, always tweaking the courts. Patrick Nielsen Johnson has 2 titles this year, and no one talks about him. Well, let's start talking about him. Thank you. It's true. So what? Remind me, Patrick Nielsen, I know you're an expert on the title records and a lot of these stats. Remind me what those 2 titles were. But a couple of things I noticed about Steve Johnson's play last night were, first, that he was making mistakes with his ball toss on his serve a lot. This was happening a lot. And recently I haven't watched a lot of matches by Steve Johnson, so I don't know if it's really kind of a structural part of his game where it just takes him a while to get the right ball toss. Houston and Newport, right, the clay courts. And he won in Newport on the turf. Is that right? Thanks for letting me know. I probably heard about that vaguely, but of course those aren't super competitive tournaments, but they are impressive. I found him impressive last night. He hits with a double fister, but he slices a lot. Really slices a lot. And now that's something to talk about, the slice. People have really different views on the slice, don't they? I know lots of Federer fans, they see Federer slicing and they say, uh-oh, too defensive, and they want to see him swing through, come over the top, as Federer likes to say. Perhaps not relevant to the Grand Slams, Farzan, perhaps not to the 1000s, but he is showing signs of improvement. Of course, he's 28, but all of the evidence suggests that it'll be 2 or 3 more years before Steve Johnson peaks. Of course, we're living in that strange time in history where all the old fogies, according to the previous standards anyway, all the old fogies are doing best. Yeah, his slice was very dependable last night against Busta. Busta didn't know what to do with Steve Johnson, folks. He didn't have answers. I like the knocking metaphor. Johnson was the one who knocked, and he was just knocking all over Carreño Busta's serve. Now, Busta is great. I love to watch him play. He slices a lot less, mind you. But with Johnson, some of the other results he's had this year, or I think in general, the best results he's had in terms of top 10 players, he's beaten Dominique Thiem. He's beaten Gasquet. He's beaten Tsonga in previous years. His forehands are powerful. But with respect to the slice, let me go back to the slice. Is it a defensive shot or an offensive shot? Is the slice a defensive shot or an offensive shot? It's a legitimate question because you know what? It can subtly operate as an offensive shot. That's what happens when you're talking about some of the best slices in the game. Roger Federer's slice, of course. Dimitrov has a nice slice as well. It's a hybrid. It's part defensive. It's part offensive. Let me say, if Roger didn't have his slice, then he would be in big trouble against guys like Nadal because he uses the slice. It does come in defensively, folks. But he uses the slice essentially, Federer and so many of the great slicers use the slice as a defensive mechanism. Sure. Usually the shots are deep. Usually it's hard to get a better piece of it, maybe coming over the top with some topspin or whatnot. It's harder to get a better piece given the nature of the shot coming at you. But it does enable Roger and so many others to retrieve shots. And that's part of the beauty of the one-handed backhand. Part of the beauty of the one-handed backhand is the reach. Now, of course, even players that play with two fisters will reach with one hand. They'll do whatever they can do under the circumstances. They will reach if they have to. But it's an interesting shot because it can function offensively. Federer can use it offensively. Now, part of how that offensive dimension of the slice works is by changing up the pace. Of course, the slice is critical on the turf because it can also result in some strange, unpredictable bounces. But to the people who say, to the people who believe Federer should not slice as much, I ask you, and I'm getting some comments from Eric Hansen, the slice is efficient on grass, not too much, or too much on the hard courts if you're using it too much. Listen, that's true. If you're using it too much, if literally you're left with no other option, because there are circumstances under which Federer and many other players will slice because there's simply no other shot that they have given the nature and severity of the shot coming at them. So again, it can be defensive, but we should be thankful for that very effective defensive mechanism that Federer has, because I can't tell you how many times I've watched Roger Federer play very good players, whether it be Del Potro, Cilic, Nadal, Djokovic, and the player on the other side of the court, the opponent will just hit a devastating shot into the corner, and I feel like, you know what, that's got to be a winner. For any other person, it would have been the winner, but for Federer, of course, he uses that slice so effectively. He can retrieve shots. He can't put a lot of pace on it. That's not the point. Sometimes it's defensive, but on the turf, it can be very offensive. In any case, Steve Johnson was using a lot of slices. Carreño Busta slices as well, but I was impressed with Steve Johnson's slice. I was very impressed with Steve Johnson's slice. He doesn't really hit with his two-fister very often. He does come back with some very devastating returns. But in particular with Johnson's forehand, I think that's probably the more attacking shot in his game. It's probably the more offensively oriented shot in his game. And man, he just whips those forehands. Whew! Busta didn't have answers, guys. Busta did not have answers for Steve Johnson last night, notwithstanding the fact that Steve Johnson cannot seem to get his serve toss correct. There was probably 12, 13, 14 times during that match that the man stopped and had to toss the ball up again. Now, in a couple of those situations, it was interesting that he did the toss. I mean, is it a tactical thing? Do you think? I don't know if you were watching the Johnson match. By the way, we got that final coming up in Winston-Salem tonight. Should be a good one. I'm definitely going to watch it. It's Medvedev, who was able to take out Taro Daniel, who seemed to be unbreakable and unbeatable. Or maybe unbeatable, not unbreakable. Not unbreakable like Roger was in Cincy before Djokovic put an end to that. Oh, goodness. Put an abrupt end to that. Talk about being the one who knocks. Djokovic is the knocker, folks. He is the one who knocks. Sad to see Taro Daniel go out, and he did get demolished. It was dual sticks. 2 sticks for Taro Daniel. 2 breadsticks, baby. Well, Medvedev's looking strong. To be honest, I probably need to watch a few of Medvedev's matches before I make a definitive prediction. It's coming up very soon anyway. In fact, heck, that might be starting during the course of this live stream at the rate we're going. But I like Johnson. I like Johnson tonight. What do you think, Patrick? I like Johnson tonight. I think, that slice serves him well. It's defensive, but baby, does it work, particularly when you can back it up with those whipping forehands. I think Steve Johnson, he might use something of an Eastern grip. The way he whips his forehands resembles Roger. In fact, Roger, of course, as many of you know, plays with an Eastern grip. So the other big issue in the news is Serena Williams and this catsuit thing. Well, there's so much to talk about with the men. There's so much going on in professional tennis on the ATP circuit right now that really I don't have much time. I mean, we went for 2 or 3 hours on our live stream the other day, and we're not even in a tournament. There's so much to talk about with so many great players on the men's side. Halep is a player on the women's side who's starting to, yes, I am a fan of the Boston Red Sox. Why not? I'm not a huge baseball fan. I'm not a lover of many of the traditional sports. I love tennis. Tennis is my sport for a number of reasons. I love the one-on-one dimension of tennis. The team dimension of other sports really screws things up, totally screws things up. It's total accountability on a tennis court, total accountability. Now, probably going to have a few people come on and say, well, we would have liked to hear you say that, Aaron, when Roger lost and you were making excuses. Listen, I don't think I make excuses for Roger Federer. I think I just call the facts as I see them. Hope Johnson wins. Never liked Medvedev, and Johnson seems like a great guy. Yeah, he does. Although, I don't know if you heard me back then, Eric, but he's doing some strange thing with his tosses. I hope that's not tactical. I hope he's not trying to kind of interrupt conversation hope he doesn't interrupt our conversation. I hope he's not trying to interrupt concentration on the other side of the court with that, because that's kind of underhanded and bad. But in any case, he needs to learn how to toss the ball. This is coming from someone who actually does that. I do that actually fairly often. I need a perfect toss in order to serve well. And, you know, when there's wind or whatnot, it does happen. And it happens to the best of them. No question about it. It happens to the best of the players. But Steve Johnson last night was unusual. Very unusual. It was an unusually large number of botched tosses. And in a couple of instances, this resulted, like he got the toss right in the end, and it resulted in a devastating ace. So he knows what he's doing. Other times it didn't. Other times it seemed to kind of disrupt his own conversation because it started to be conspicuous as the match progressed. And so I think towards the end, he's got an interesting personality. You know, I like it. There was he challenged a call, or as they say, he took the issue upstairs, challenged a line call. The Hawkeye came out, but before the Hawkeye came out, he was making these strange faces. Like basically, the faces were meant to communicate that he wasn't sure he was right. He might have been wrong. He's just making sure he was wrong. But he was just making these strange faces. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody make that face on a tennis court, on a professional tennis court. I've probably made that face on a tennis court. And I do screw up my tosses too. So maybe Steve Johnson and I should have a beer. He does seem like a cool guy. And I do think that he could do well tonight. I think he's capable of beating Medvedev. I have no sympathies with Medvedev. I have some thin sympathies with Johnson. I like that I'm hearing he's winning titles. You know, he's just kind of, I'm going to have to go back and look at his record and understand Steve Johnson a little more. But what I liked about him was the whipping forehand, the very dependable slicing from Steve Johnson. Oh, and let me say about the forehand, I think he might hit that with an Eastern grip, as I said before, because it seems to be reminiscent of Federer's. Well, not quite as good as Roger Federer, but well, someone came on and commented the other day on Twitter. Remember, I talked about Nick Kyrgios, who came out and said that he thought Stefanos Tsitsipas is not a good tennis player. And one of the reasons I mentioned as one factor why I didn't think it was appropriate for Kyrgios to be saying that, or just he could just button his lip. One reason is because they've never played. But then I got a comment on YouTube, which I really appreciated. And the person said, well, Aaron, you've never played Tsitsipas either. So that's true. I've never played Tsitsipas. But I think that if you're going to make a negative, basically derogatory comment about somebody, then you should probably wait till you have some experience, because that's, you know, and that was coming right after Cincinnati when he beat all those top 10 players, Rogers Cup, where he beat all the top 10 players. So, I mean, I don't know how you argue that he's not a good player. You don't argue that he's not a good player. I'm not sure where I was going with this, but as I mentioned yesterday, Alexander Zverev also, but Alexander Zverev at least played Tsitsipas. He has at least played matches with Tsitsipas, so he's in a position. Now, Zverev didn't exactly say that Tsitsipas wasn't a good player. That would be kind of weird for anybody to say. Only Nick Kyrgios would come out and serve up that kind of crap, serve up that kind of malarkey. Only Nick Kyrgios. That's why we love him. Well, I got a message on Twitter saying Nick Kyrgios is expletive, calling him a very foul name. Well, I don't mind Nick Kyrgios too much, but he does have a sort of mouth almighty. In any case, the one other thing about Busta, I don't know if you guys have watched Busta a lot, but With Busta, he's really interesting on his return of serve. Now, he wasn't doing it a lot last night, but he does this thing when he's returning. He will wait, he'll crouch down a little bit, and he'll put his left hand on his knee. I know you've probably seen this. It's a very strange position. It almost looks like he's like a baseball umpire or something. He's going to call. I want him to say like strike one. But he does put his hand on his knee, and it's a funny stance. But it got me to thinking about the different stances that they have when they're returning serve. And some of them have some pretty funny stances. Somebody, a couple of days ago on the live stream mentioned that they didn't like Tsitsipas. No, not that they didn't like Tsitsipas. It was that they didn't like Tsitsipas's service motion. And I thought that was an interesting comment. I mean, there are a few kind of off-color things about Tsitsipas. It's just kind of unusual the way he kind of moves around the court. I mean, he's such a big guy. He's 6'4". I think he might be pushing 6'5". But he returns serve in a very unique way, and that positioning is interesting as well. And it's reminiscent of Coric. In a way, it's a little too eager, I find. I mean, listen, we're probably on here. We've all played tennis, and we know what it's like to return a serve. Maybe some of us know what it's like to return a very fast serve. Sure, you have to be alert. Absolutely. You have to be very much in the game. You have, as a professional, of course, you have to be trying to predict where the server is going. You have to, it's all, in a way, you have to, it's the time in a match when you have to be most attentive. I get that. I understand that. But some of these, and I love Busta's hand because, hey, whatever. It's just interesting. Again, he looks just like a baseball umpire. Strike one. Well, let me say, Steve Johnson was pitching a lot of strikes last night for Busta, the umpire. But he has an interesting return. But then Tsitsipas and Coric, those two, I think they're a little too eager. The way they stand and the way they kind of prepare themselves for a serve, it's a little weird. And it reminds me, the only thing I can think of is like a puppy dog. They're like a puppy dog waiting, for their master's embrace. Well, I don't think puppy dogs have any place on a tennis court. I still love Tsitsipas, but I think that Tsitsipas and Coric in particular are just too eager, too puppy dog-like. Zverev is interesting too, Alexander Zverev, because he makes those weird faces when he's returning. Really weird faces. Djokovic gives the feeling of a leaping cheetah. Aaron, I read an article last night stating that the French tennis press was not going to allow Serena in the catsuit on French soil again. Is that a fact? Well, that is what I'm hearing. That's what the headlines are. The tennis, I have to, of course, before I go on live, I have to make myself somewhat conversant with the headlines. And that is what they're saying. So let's talk about this catsuit thing. My cover photo of course, says, "Long live the catsuit." I'm all for the catsuit. I mean, it's certainly not. And I mean, if anything, the catsuit is a little more appropriate than some of the little tiny skirts, excuse me. Got to get my terminology right. Some of the little tiny skirts that are always blowing up, and it's just like they're wearing panties anyway. That might be good for people that like to look at the women's lower body, but it's very exposed. Now, a catsuit, on the other hand, it's totally covered. So tradition, the French Open president was talking about, or the association, I think it was, they were talking about tradition. Now, Serena tried to basically defuse this big time. Let's pull up this article. She tried to defuse this. And she said, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm not going to be wearing it next year anyway. Not a big deal. But she mentioned that she was wearing it because of circulation issues. Well, I'm okay, but we are talking about Serena Williams. And I just think it's a big issue in tennis. This is a tennis question. It is. I mean, we're not going off topic here, really. I mean, we're not. If you came to the Uncut Live Tennis Talk Daily to listen to talk about the men's tennis circuit, I suppose it's a little misleading. But if you guys don't want to talk about that, we don't have to. But I wanted to mention that, to my mind, the catsuit's fine. To my mind, it's less revealing, less inappropriate than. Not that the short skirts are inappropriate. I don't mean to say that. I'm just saying if you're going to get kind of moralistic and tradition oriented in the claims you're making, then, they can work against you as well here because, tradition in the clothing. I mean, what do we want to make the men go back and wear long slacks again? No, not long slacks. Don't they wear long slacks at Wimbledon still in like the qualifying rounds or something? It's so funny to look at those old pictures when they're wearing slacks. But let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Open again. Again, listen, what I'm hearing, I have some evidence on Twitter that certain folks, I think Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis, in fact, circulated something to the effect that he didn't believe Federer's draw was so bad. And it's not so bad. The other news about Federer, folks, and if you guys know something more about this, I do want to know, because information is always updating. He's practicing more today, but I had a viewer, very awesome viewer, very smart viewer, and very loyal viewer who mentioned that Federer did not look great in practice. He did not look great in practice. More mishits coming off his racket, apparently. So possibly timing issues. I will say this about Roger Federer, however, particularly in practice, which is that he's notoriously bad in practice. He loses in practice. He practices with folks like David Goffin, which is the new correct way to pronounce it, David Goffin. And Goffin has beaten Federer. A number of people have beaten Federer in practice. But that's not to say that the mishits are in any way a positive sign. I mean, the mishitting is just inexcusable, man. Now, of course, he brought out the Black Beauty. Unclear whether he'll be going back to the tuxedo. The Wilson Pro Staff autograph is the tuxedo. But unclear what he'll be doing. But I think the mishits, kind of comes down to a timing thing. It relies or it flows out of a number of different factors and could involve a number of different sort of misfires in the components of Federer's game. It involves the footwork. Everything really comes back down to that footwork, particularly in Federer's game. It comes back down to that footwork. And that's what he said after the match with Djokovic, which was the footwork was just all wrong today. And that's why he couldn't get a piece of those shots that were coming in at his toes, as Djokovic is wont to do in Federer matches. Hey, Cultura and Sport. Nice to see you. Nice to have you. What are the practice set results? I don't know what the practice set results are, whether those are available. Federer also needs to work on his forehand. Yes, I mean, to some degree. Listen, I actually, early in the tournament at Cincinnati, Federer's forehand looked great. I mean, I saw some fantastic forehands. I was talking about Steve Johnson last night in the match against Carreño Busta. And Steve Johnson was whipping some of those forehands. It led me to speculate whether he holds with an Eastern grip. because it was reminiscent of Federer, although I have said that they're constantly tweaking the grips. So it's interesting. It's a very technical thing. But Federer's forehand looked great in the beginning portion. So I only partially agree with you there. Listen, we can't extrapolate completely. We can't impute to Federer all of those terrible qualities that he exhibited on Sunday. We can't impute that to something, some character trait or playing trait. But the one thing I'll say, the one thing I will say about Federer, and I want to go back to this because I got Fed fans that think that I've lost faith in Fed. I have not lost faith in Fed. I have lots of faith in Fed. I have faith that he will be in the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open. I also have some faith that he will not go beyond the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open. I'm not betting on that result. I'm not so convinced that I'm going to be betting a lot of money on that result. No, you can never count the great Federer out. Never. And I've said it before. I said in my last 2 episodes, I'll say it again. If he gets past Djokovic into the semifinal, and assuming Djokovic is playing well, Federer is the new favorite to win the tournament because he knows how to do business with Rafa. And if he gets through Djokovic, he will be in no mood and in no form to be taking any malarkey from Nadal. Well, he'll take some malarkey from Nadal. Nadal will always make Federer deal with some difficulty, some pressure. Nadal and Djokovic. Nadal, Djokovic on the one hand. Here's one way to distinguish between Djokovic and Federer. Hear me out here. It bears on what I was talking about on Sunday. People don't like the way I use the term pusher. Many people believe that's, I don't know, a derogatory term or some kind of bad term. And it's not a high compliment to call someone a pusher. Ever since Jimmy Connors in that match way back in the 80s was caught on mic in that match against Lendl, calling Lendl a effing pusher. He was so mad at Lendl, and Lendl was winning. It's the same kind of thing. Now, Federer wasn't in any position. Federer had no standing to be complaining about Djokovic on Sunday. But Connors was playing well in this match. I believe it was at the U.S. Open. You can find it on YouTube. 92 U.S. Open. Find it on YouTube. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, that is an interesting match, and it's an interesting set of comments. Now, Jimmy Connors was firecracker. I mean, that was a different era. I mean, it's a different era. It's a different era. In a way, Roger Federer ushered in a new era of tennis with respect to on-court outbursts. Just as Federer himself, in his personal evolution, was able to achieve emotional control, well, so too the rest of the game and the players have followed in that result, such that there's a new norm. But in any case, when Connor was playing back in the early 90s, there was no Federer sense of moderation and emotional control. And Connors, called Lendl a pusher and whatnot. But the real point about this, and what it kind of boils down to, the difference between Federer on the one hand and Djokovic on the other. Hear me out here. I think this distills the essence. Nadal's a little different. Nadal I'll have to put to one side. But if we want to really get down to the nuts and bolts with Federer and Djokovic, now, of course, on the surface, there's the two-handed backhand versus the one-handed. There's a number of things. Federer has a more... On the surface, which is grass, that most rewards good serving, he does a good job with his serves, serving up a lot of aces at Wimbledon. But the difference between Federer and Djokovic, the real difference. No, Djokovic was not 100%. I completely agree with you. Why? Because Federer didn't require him to be 100%. Now, yeah, you might be saying that, I don't know if you're suggesting that Djokovic, you're saying he was lucky, so maybe you're saying that he might have lost and wouldn't have been able to kind of kick it up into another gear. I firmly believe that if Federer had required him to, Djokovic would have kicked it up and would have diversified his game and put some balls into his game. He's got balls in his game, but he didn't have to use it against a lackluster Federer. Well, but the difference is this, and this kind of applies across the board, if you ask me. This kind of applies across the board, if you ask me. Djokovic's basic approach is as follows. Djokovic basically tries to make the other player lose the point. He wants to ensure through his game that the other player does not win the point. That's his goal. I will get in the court and I will make sure that this player, whether it be Federer, whether it be Nadal, I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent Roger Federer, whoever it may be, from winning this point. That's what he does. And then when he prevents them, when he achieves his goal of preventing him, the opponent, from winning the point, he's won the point. Djokovic wins because by default, he wins the point. So only one player can win the point. Federer, on the other hand, doesn't approach points like that. Federer approaches a point in the diametrically opposite way, which is generally, now he modifies his game. There are nuances in his game all the time. He's not always the most attacking player, no. But he builds up momentum in the course of a point so that the attacks kind of come later. But what Federer seeks to do is just win a point. He's not seeking to prevent the other player from winning the point. He's doing so indirectly, but it's a change of attitude. And it results in a completely different style of play. If your goal is to prevent the other player from winning the point, you're going to play a different game than you would if your goal is to win the point yourself. Affirmatively. And Federer seeks to win points, seeks to construct points thoughtfully, win them with winners, which Djokovic doesn't hit a lot of. That's the other piece of evidence that's interesting about Djokovic. He really doesn't hit a lot of winners. He's capable of hitting winners. Really capable. Man, he's hit some doozies, some old faithfuls. The backhands down the line. He knows how to hit winners, and he can do that. And he can display some very thoughtful point construction himself. But in general, he's not about point construction. He's about preventing the other player on the other side of the court from winning. He wants to prevent the other player from winning the point, and by default, he will win the point. That's what he did with Federer in general. Federer didn't really have enough of a game on Sunday to have any choice. He was just trying to stay alive, and he couldn't stay alive. Yeah, Amal K, he simply keeps the ball in play. That's what I said last time. But listen, I don't want to insult Djokovic. You know, I get people that come on, they kind of have thin skin. Maybe they love Djokovic. They don't think I'm being fair to Djokovic. My position on this is, I guess, somewhat nuanced. I don't see it as nuanced. I see it as pretty simple, but some people have a hard time understanding it. The point is that in that match, he didn't play at the level that he's capable of playing in that match. And most of that match consistent with the paradigm, the Djokovician paradigm. Oh, doesn't that sound intellectual? The Djokovician paradigm. Consistent with the idea that he's out there to prevent the other player from winning points. He was doing a lot of pushing. And pushing is not meant to be a derogatory term there. It's meant to be purely a descriptive term. I'm not meaning to impute anything bad about his playing, but I will stand on that proposition, which is that the main difference between, on the one hand, Djokovic at the conceptual level, right? The level at which they approach the game, the real large, the paradigm level. For Djokovic, it's all about preventing the other player from winning the point. And for Federer, it's all about attempting to win the point in a thoughtful, somewhat thoughtful, but in a logical way that often with Federer involves a lot of aesthetically pleasing movement and play. Oh boy, I hope we get some great Roger Federer on display at the U.S. Open. Either way, I mean, every tournament he plays, he displays brilliance. That's the truth. Djokovic is a fighter. Yes, he is. He's a fighter. And that is the quality that Federer is having a hard time mustering. Isn't that it? Isn't that it? Where's the fight in Federer, folks? Where's the fight in Federer? Where did it go? Will he be able to bring it back in the U.S. Open? Will we see the Federer fight? Because he has it. It's just a matter of accessing it. It has to be accessed. And something is happening. He has a blockage. It's a pattern. Indian Wells. Gosh, that was heartbreaking. Good God. 3, 4, whatever it was. Championship points. So infuriating. It was infuriating. I have a person on Twitter that believes that that was the match when Federer fell apart. Even notwithstanding, good performance at Stuttgart, notwithstanding a nice deep run at Halle, and notwithstanding some very fine play at Wimbledon that weren't for that South African, that marathon man. How do you do that? How do you do that if you're Anderson? I've said before, some of these guys are taking enhancement drugs, supplementing. There's such a thin line. I'm not accusing Anderson of doing that, but the first question I had about him when he was doing all those insanely long matches was, what's he putting in his body? Because he's no youngster either. He's no youngster. No, sir. Why is he now at 31, 32 years old? Why is he now having all these deep runs out of the blue? Out of the blue. It's one thing for Federer to come back at 36 and start winning Grand Slams. That's not out of the blue. He was the greatest tennis player on earth when he was 25 years old. But Anderson comes out of the woodwork in the final of the U.S. Open last year. But if you look back at Anderson's record, truth be told, maybe coming out of the woodwork is a little bit of an extreme. Yes, Nadal is a fighter. Nadal's a fighter too. That's the difference between Federer and, on the one hand, right now, at this point in time, it's the difference between Federer on the one hand and Nadal and Djokovic on the other. Nadal and Djokovic can, at will, kick it into high gear. How does that manifest itself on the court? It's simple, pretty much every time. They get broken, and they get broken in virtually every match. Nadal and Djokovic get broken in many matches. Nadal less, but Djokovic, totally breakable. I said on Twitter the other day, and I said it, I repeated it again. You can go back and check my account. I said in the middle of that match in Cincinnati, when it was quite clear that Djokovic was going to win. In other words, pretty much for me, it was a foregone conclusion Djokovic was going to win. But Federer had not broken him yet. It was the beginning of the second set. And a few minutes before Federer actually did break him, I said on Twitter, I said, I would be surprised if Roger Federer did not break Djokovic. I knew he was going to lose, but I'd be surprised. Why? Because Djokovic was getting broken all week. He gets broken all the time. But, and this is the killer instinct that Djokovic and Nadal have that Federer is struggling to access, can't quite work it up. It's the killer instinct. When they get broken, and this is how it manifests itself, they break back. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It is ironically and paradoxically almost a bad idea. If you're an opponent of Rafael Nadal on the tennis court, it's almost a bad idea to break Rafael Nadal. Why? You're going to piss the bull off. Oh, he gets pissed off when you break him. And then it's just ugly. It's breadsticks and bagels flying everywhere. Nadal, oh goodness. But Djokovic has that ability too. Case in point would have been the match with Raonic in that first set. He was broken. He smashed his racket. Embarrassing. What an embarrassing thing to do, this racket smash. Federer gets pissed off. You know, Nadal, they get up. Nadal is very even-keeled. He really is. Nadal doesn't smash rackets. Federer doesn't smash rackets. I'm sure a couple of you might give me some exceptions. Of course, when Federer was younger, he smashed rackets. I'm not saying he didn't smash rackets when he was younger. I'm sure he smashed many, many rackets when he was younger, but not these days. Never will Federer go that far, folks. That's just too much. And it violates the set of standards that Federer himself, with Nadal's help in a way, ushered into the game. There were many years, many decades when it was okay to have a spaz on court. Not okay, but Eli Nastase and John McEnroe, they kind of cleared the field for that, right? I mean, they went to extremes and there was pushback against them. But they lowered the standards such that it was okay to pull those kind of antics on the court, on a professional tennis court. But Federer, with some help from Nadal, but it really was mainly Federer. And again, it mirrored his own personal development because he used to be a racket smasher. But as soon as he, as soon as he stopped smashing rackets, as soon as he began to exert some control over his emotions in the course of his tennis matches, he broke through and he became the greatest player of all time. So what that showed to the up-and-coming players is that you got to get a hold on your emotions. And of course, it's part of the reason we love Federer. We love the serene Federer, the emotionally even, the stolid Federer even. That's the Federer we love. And I'm reversing myself because I remember a couple of months back, Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis has said a couple of times that, we like the grumpy old goat, right? I disagree. We don't want Fed grumpy, and I take anything I've said to the contrary, I retract. We want the serene Fed. We want the emotionally even-keeled Fed that has complete and utter control over his emotions and therefore complete and utter control over the tennis match. They go hand in hand, don't they, folks? They really do. So, but with Djokovic, he had the spaz, he smashed the racket, he embarrassed himself. I hope there were some boos. I can't really remember. But then he turned it around and came storming back. Came storming back to take the set. Of course, he broke back. He always breaks back. So that's what Roger can't do. If we want to boil it down, Really. I mean, I suppose the first problem is that Roger is getting broken to begin with. If Roger is getting broken in a match, it could be a signal of some problems. It's not an insurmountable problem. I mean, it's okay if Federer is broken. Being broken is just, you don't need to hold your serve 100% of the time to lift up lots of trophies. You don't need to. Well, Federer has to, I think, start to understand that. He needs to restore somehow muster up some confidence in that return game. He needs to be able to storm back after getting broken. If he can't do that, then he loses, or everything comes down to the breaker. In other words, he loses on account of surrendering a break of serve and can't break back, or he can hold serve, but he can never break. He needs to work on the return game. The return game to some degree depends on the ground game, and the ground game has been suffering with Federer. Those are very kind of general terms I'm phrasing this argument in, but that's what's been wrong. It's this terrible ground game, this undependable ground game. Well, one thing I was thinking about earlier, and it kind of flows from this insight I had about, well, it's not an insight, it's what everybody calls Rafa Nadal, which is a bull. People call Rafael Nadal a bull, and when I talk about him sort of breaking back, storming back, I often will refer to him as a bull. Well, what animals do the other players resemble? Players as animals. Well, I wager this. Roger Federer is a cat. He's a cat. I love the way Roger Federer moves about the court. He's a cat. When he's at his best, he's a cat. The quick movement and the ability to sort of attack in a surprising way. And Rafa is the bull, without question. But what is Djokovic? What animal does Djokovic most resemble? And I think we were talking about that. I think you guys got on this topic before. I saw a few comments about this. And I conclude, I'd be interested in your views as well, but I conclude that Djokovic most resembles a hyena. A hyena. Now, hyenas actually have a reputation. Yeah, or cheetah. I like the cheetah, but cheetah kind of suggests the cat. In a way, I reserve cats and cheetahs for Federer because he is the cat man when he starts moving well on the court. He resembles a cat. That's the animal that I think of. Rafa's the bull. I think Djokovic a hyena. Look up a hyena. They have kind of a reputation for kind of being a cowardly animal. No, they are devastating. They will chase very large predators away. I think a hyena is one of the best ways to think about Djokovic. But who's the lion? Well, I guess Alexander Zverev's the lion because he has that big blonde mane. It's kind of an interesting topic. Well, Federer was out in practice the other day. For those of you who just tuning in, apparently there was a rough practice, or he didn't look great in practice. So what can I say? It's not at all indicative of what he will do on the match courts in competition. Farzan, I think Federer is a cat, and I'm unwilling to surrender the cheetah metaphor and give that to someone else, because I think with cat, it's kind of like he has tiger. It's like cats, tigers, and cheetahs. I think Federer's got that whole cat family. Now, hyenas, I think, are related to cats. So Djokovic has that one similarity, but I think he's most like a hyena. And hyenas don't take any crap out in the wild, folks. Hyenas are tough. So that's, again, that's not an insult. Delpo is the fox. Yeah, maybe so. I guess the only problem with that is that foxes are kind of small. Am I drunk? I'm not drunk. I'm drinking coffee. I'm absolutely not drunk. And I wouldn't come on to do tennis talk, uncut tennis talk drunk. I can't be drunk when I'm yeah, Diego Schwartzman. That's a good one. He's the fox. Let's look at some of the other reader comments that I've gotten. I still think, notwithstanding, I think Matt from Coffee Break Tennis did come out with something to the effect that Rogers' draw is not as bad as all that. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as all that. I mean, boy, like Stan's been getting, with the rankings issues, with the falling in the rankings, Stan's been getting some terrible draws. It's been, and even Djokovic, he had to fight through these terrible draws. But the Nick Kyrgios match in the third round is indisputably a factor that renders Federer's draw more difficult at that point than basically all of the other top players, particularly Nadal. But the real zinger, of course, for Federer is this barrier, this wall. We could use the metaphor, this wall that's standing potentially in the quarterfinal. There's a wall that's being erected in Arthur Ashe Stadium in preparation for the quarterfinal, and his name is Novak Djokovic. So Federer's got this big wall to deal with in the quarterfinals, potentially and likely. And so regardless of whether we conclude that Federer's draw is super difficult, I mean, it's a relative question. Relative to Nadal's draw, say, relative to Nadal's draw into the semifinals, Federer's draw looks pretty clean and easy. That's the truth. Excuse me. Now I'm getting things mixed up. Maybe I am drunk. Relative to Nadal's, Federer's draw is more difficult. So why is that? Because Nadal doesn't have anybody in the caliber of a Djokovic in the quarterfinal. The worst Nadal will have to deal with in the quarterfinal is the Lion, Alexander Zverev, or maybe the Fox, Diego Schwartzman. Maybe Nishikori. Not sure what animal Nishikori would be. Excuse me. Now I'm looking at the wrong sheet. Can we, if it's possible, we can just erase that last 5 minutes. That's who Cilic will have to be dealing with in the quarterfinals. Nadal's only problem in the quarterfinals is Anderson. So compared to Djokovic, Anderson is not a big threat in the quarterfinals. Possibly for Nadal, it could be Thiem. I'm sorry, before I was reading from basically Cilic's quarterfinal. Cilic will have to get through Goffin to get into the quarterfinals and will likely face Zverev. So that's happening down at the in the first quarter of the bottom half. But Nadal has Anderson to deal with potentially in the quarterfinals. Anderson's no slouch, but he's not a Djokovic. No, sir. Not a Djokovic. So that alone renders Federer's draw, but I mean, more difficult. But then, of course, you have the Kyrgios issue in the third round. So the only issue is that, or the only proposition we can make really with certainty is that Federer's draw is harder than Nadal's. Into the final, that's true. Now, in the semifinals, Federer may have to deal with Cilic, Goffin, Zverev. That will happen in the semifinal. But that's not necessarily I think that's probably more manageable than, well, it's harder than Nadal, I believe, because Nadal's going to have Delpo, possibly. Isner, Raonic could see him in the semifinals. it's that group of people. Whereas Federer could see Cilic. I think Cilic is an equal threat. I mean, in a way, the semifinals for Roger and Rafa are kind of more even. If it ends up being Nadal versus Del Potro in the semifinals, that would be pretty much as competitive for Nadal as a match against Cilic would be for Federer. But it could work out in some different ways. The main distinction for Federer is in the third round, where he's got to deal with Kyrgios, and is in the quarterfinal, where he's got to deal with Djokovic. Well, so I suppose if I was to refine my statement, it would be that Nadal's path into the semifinals is easier than Federer's. Gosh, I don't know why I mixed these two up. Well, in part because it's the Fidal problem, right? They're kind of the same person. They're a two-headed beast. Into the semifinal, Nadal's draw is cleaner and easier than Federer's, potentially, assuming that the people that I'm positing to be involved in this draw will be involved and will get through. In the semifinal, it does kind of even out, particularly if Nadal ends up facing Del Potro, and if Federer were to get to the semifinal, which I'm not predicting he is, but if he faced, say, Cilic, that would be about on the same level of a competitor as Delpo. In fact, Cilic and Delpo are kind of, I think of them as a similar sort of player. I think one-time Grand Slam champions. They're sort of similar. So now Djokovic, on the other hand, he's going to deal with Marton Fucsovics in the first round. Might have to deal with like Sandgren in the second round. May have to deal with Leonardo Meyer in the third round. Not much. This is not a steep competition here. And then maybe Pui or Carreño Busta. And based on Busta's form last night, remember, he got his butt kicked by Steve Johnson, the slicer, the slice. And I don't know what Steve Johnson is in terms of an animal. If there's an animal that makes strange faces, then that's the animal that Steve Johnson resembles most. But yeah, Djokovic then in the fourth round, it would have to deal with Pui and Carreño Busta. Listen, Djokovic's path into the quarterfinal, where he might meet Federer, is easier than Federer's path into the quarterfinal. That much is true. Because for the one reason that Federer's got to deal with Kyrgios. Now, listen, if Kyrgios sucks, if Kyrgios comes out there and, I don't know, just isn't in the right mood, and he's fickle. He's fickle, and he does strange things. He threw that set a while back where he got bageled, remember? Then came roaring back. He did it. It was calculated. That was at the Rogers Cup. But he does bizarre things. He says bizarre things, and he does bizarre things. So and Kyrgios has never, and this is probably a point that Matt made. I would imagine you'd want to make this point, but I don't think Kyrgios has had any real deep runs at the U.S. Open. My notes say that he's been to the third round, but I want to say there's maybe been one into the fourth round, but I have, again, it's the third round. So what's on the line in the potential match with Federer will be, whether Federer can ensure that Kyrgios does not go deeper than he has in the past. Basically stop him in the third round where he's been stopped before. So maybe, but on the other hand, with Kyrgios has demonstrated an ability to, as to use a phrase I've been using, to kind of get under Federer's skin, which may not be quite the right metaphor for Kyrgios. It's definitely the right metaphor for Djokovic against Federer, and even Nadal. They know how to get under his skin. But with Kyrgios, it's more just, real hard hitting, and it kind of boils down to the fact that Federer can't get inside of Kyrgios's tremendous serve. And I think That's the problem. So the Kyrgios match will be a good test for Federer because, again, so much of this comes down to his return game. He needs a more agile return game. He needs a more responsive return game. He needs to be able to muster the fight to break back. His usual route is to just hold serve so he never has to break back. That's how he likes to play. And he's got a good enough serve to do that often. He can operate in the sort of bubble, the comfort bubble of his serve. And that gives him kind of more latitude to operate during the return games. He can take some more chances and whatnot. But he needs to stop taking chances necessarily. I mean, he needs to work on point construction too. I mean, that was one of the problems with Djokovic, you know. Yeah, sure, Djokovic was pushing, but Federer could not construct points. Maybe it comes down to his feet. I'm not sure, but he could not construct points. He just couldn't apply a logical construction. He couldn't execute. Sure, he was thinking in those terms. He just couldn't execute. So he couldn't end the points. In other words, I was saying before that Djokovic's main strategy in most tennis matches is simply merely, and I say this often that I say merely as kind of a figure of speech. It's hard to do, but what he does is his goal is to prevent the other player from winning the point. The answer to that, the way to beat Djokovic, the way to beat that approach is to play with a more aggressive style and to affirmatively construct a point to win it, to affirmatively win the point. That's the answer to Djokovic's knock. The knock of, I will prevent you from winning this point. It's not, I will win the point. That's the subtle difference. Djokovic doesn't say, I want to win this point. It's more, I will prevent you from winning the point, and therefore, by default, win the point myself. But his concern is to prevent the other player from winning the point, where Federer, and the only good response, because if you try to combat that with a similar approach, if you come out onto the court with Djokovic and you say, okay, I'm going to try to prevent Djokovic from winning the point. I'm not going to try to win the point myself. I'm going to try to prevent Djokovic, can lead to problems. It's kind of like charges sort of repel, and it could ultimately redound to the benefit of Djokovic. I mean, never mind that Djokovic is he's too good at that strategy. Federer's not capable of executing the strategy of preventing the other player from winning the point as well as Djokovic. He's just not capable of executing that. It's just not what his game is all about. And I like that. We want variety in the approach, and that's why I welcome Djokovic. Got so many people giving me a hard time about the Djokovic thing, but I never insulted him. And I love the fact that he's part of the game, and I love the fact in particular that he's coming back. He came back. He was up to the top. He had 2015, which was arguably the greatest season ever recorded in tennis history. Arguably, but really it wasn't. Federer's 2006 was better. We all know that. We know better. By a little, by a hair. By just a hair. But I love the fact that he's come back, that he was at the top, then he sunk to the depths, falling to Taro Daniel. Well, in retrospect, maybe the loss to Taro Daniel wasn't that bad. Now, Medvedev, as I was saying before, dealt the double breadsticks to Daniel. So Daniel didn't finish up over there in Winston-Salem very strongly. I didn't watch every minute of that match, so but I did look at the stats, and the Daniel first serve was coming in only, I think, about 35 or 40% of the time. So it's just terrible, just junk. Not that I'm a big fan of Taro Daniel, but then Djokovic, having sunk down to the depths, suffering such humiliating losses in a way. I respect these guys because you know what? to go out on that court is to risk public humiliation, particularly for these top players who have so much riding on their play. And I think Federer has a complex relationship to that pressure that only the greatest players have. He has a complex relationship to that pressure. Sometimes he responds to it and converts it into winning energy, but he doesn't do that as dependably as a Djokovic, not these days. And Nadal, gosh, Nadal is just such a battle-tested player. I'm not sure if he has too much problem with the pressure anymore, but he probably feels it as well. But Federer needs to convert that pressure, and he will have pressure. That's another comment I got from people. I was saying that coming into the U.S. Open, one difference is from last year is that Federer doesn't have the weight of a lot of expectations. Now, in a way, that proposition is a little premature because there are expectations, and people love Federer so much that once they start watching the U.S. Open, they're going to start generating expectations. He'll feel them. Of course, the crowds will tend to be behind him. Now, if he's wearing the black again, he will risk being relabeled Darth Federer. Remember, when he was first called Darth Federer, it was at the U.S. Open, and I forget the exact year. I'm sure one of you know. But it was at the U.S. Open, and he was wearing really black. Now, the Uniqlo outfit that he's had on, is it not quite black? When he does the all black, or when he does the all, it's a darker solid color. I think it's a dark blue, to be honest. So I'm not sure Darth Federer is exactly the right thing to call him. It's not pitch black, but it is very dark in any case. But I agree with the commenters that say, okay, maybe it's not that there's no pressure. I would say this. There's less pressure on Federer this year than there was last year. Now, coming into the U.S. Open last year, he did have the fairly disappointing defeat to Zverev in Canada. But he had Wimbledon under his belt. He had the Sunshine Double under his belt. He had the Australian under his belt. He was a force to be reckoned with. Of course, at that point, coming into the U.S. Open, Rafael Nadal had a stunning clay court season. Didn't do so great. It was on the grass at Wimbledon. But lost to Gilles Muller, I think it was, and that was a 5-set match. It was a close match, but he managed to stay in that Wimbledon slump in 2017. He broke out of it this year, but in any case, coming into the U.S. Open last year, you did have Nadal, but Federer was looking dominant. Federer was looking very dominant given the titles he was racking up, and particularly vis-a-vis Nadal, against Nadal. He was whooping Nadal's butt, excuse my French, in those matches at Indian Wells, in the matches in Miami, in the match at the Australian Open. Well, the Australian Open, not so much. I mean, that was a very close match. But then later in the year, in the fall hard courts, there was another win. Well, this year, it's different. This year, it's just not as much pressure. It can't be as much pressure. He's won. All right, what has he won this year? Let's just kind of go through it. He's got a few titles. It's been a good year. He did win the Australian Open. He did win in Rotterdam. I don't even want to talk about the finals. He's been able to get to a lot of finals, but oh gosh, it's so hard to think about some of these finals with him. For you Fed fans, I know it's basically just, you can't think about it. You just have to block it out. Well, he's got to wake up with it every day. He's got to look himself in the mirror every day. In a way, I do agree with the commenter on Twitter that Del Potro match at Indian Wells was kind of the turning point with the 3 or 4 championship points or whatnot. It was too much for him. It hurt him. It was traumatic. I think there's something in that. Notwithstanding the fairly good performances at Stuttgart and at Halle. But this year there is less pressure because he's just got less, it's just less titles. And then, of course, he did win in Stuttgart, which is a 250 level tournament, although it looks more like a 500 level with the competition being, the likes of Kyrgios and Raonic. It was a pretty competitive tournament, to be honest, but it was a 250. That's an interesting topic. I was going to talk about that the other day. I mean, what are your views on this? Should Federer play more 250s? Should Federer play more 250s? Well, if he does, then he's exposed to is that match on already? I'm going to turn that on. Excuse me. I'm going to get that match going if it's on. I'll be back in 1 minute. All right. Medvedev takes the first set. Good God. Well, there goes my Steve Johnson argument. Well, good for Medvedev. I'm going to check this match out here. Meant to have this going. Hopefully this won't interfere with the stream. But, yeah, let's watch this. I'm interested in this match. I do like Steve Johnson. We were having a good discussion about him. I just need to kind of take the measure of Medvedev, see what's happening here. But yes, listen, there's less pressure on Federer, no question about it. And I mean, my argument would be that it helps. I want to get this turned down. Well, I don't have a score up yet, but I'm hearing from you guys that we do have a first set win by Medvedev. Okay, well, that is, was one of the possible outcomes here. Yes, Medvedev's taken it 6-4. Let me get up some of the stats for you. Although he did struggle in the end, apparently he had to hold from, there was a deuce cycle or possibly just one deuce in the final game there. Get this score up. And sometimes these scores are a little inaccurate. But it looks like Steve Johnson has not been able to break Medvedev at all. And the Medvedev win of the first set was predicated on a single break. You can tell that from the score. Sometimes they'll exchange breaks, and it's kind of a different dynamic, but this has looked to be a little more straightforward. Johnson's not really getting – he's 56% on his first serve. And by the way, for those of you coming in, he's losing. Steve Johnson's losing. 56% on his first serve. He's 84% on the wins in his first serve, but he's only winning half of his second serve points. Medvedev's numbers are much stronger. 64% on the first serve, 78% wins on the first serve, and then 70% wins on his second. So let's see what Johnson's doing. I was saying before, he's doing a lot of slicing. No, this is an interesting match. We don't have to, dedicate all of our attention to this match, but it is interesting. Let's see if Steve Johnson's screwing up his ball tosses. I mean, last night, he could not get his serve tosses right at all. Well, listen, this match is not over. I would not count Steve Johnson out quite yet. More slicing. Yeah, some nice approach, nice put away. He holds in the first game. Steve Johnson, that is, holds in the first game. I might be a little bit behind you guys. Actually, I think this stream coming in on Tennis TV is Fed is trash. Well, and live. Serve toss is looking a little better today. Well, these are the numbers. Johnson, 40. See, you know what? Google. Actually, Steve Johnson's numbers are far worse than the numbers that are coming up on Google. He's less than 50% on his first serve, but that might be accounting for the first game of the first set. I thought his first serve numbers were a little higher. It's hard to know what they are in terms of this information coming from Google and from some of the other sources. Even on the TV, sometimes these mid-match summaries of stats are not right. I've found that a lot. They change. Only laid up 40 love in the second game of on serve in the second game of the second set. Looks determined. Looks good. Let's see what he can do. Can he close out this love game on his second serve? Yeah, he's just really kind of smacking the ball, just teeing off in a way. Kissing the lines. Johnson comes back with a passing shot. Good God. I would not count Steve Johnson out of this match. Medvedev doesn't look that strong, but I'll have to watch a little bit more of the match. The other thing we were talking about yesterday, we were comparing some of the numbers, and I got a message from a viewer by the name of Boris. And Boris doesn't believe that we should talk about. I have a couple of viewers that think that the GOAT debate is kind of futile and it's not worth talking about. I think the idea is that we need to wait till folks retire before we start concluding, making conclusions with respect to their larger legacies in professional tennis and the history of professional tennis. I think that's the argument. It's kind of like, let's hold off. Let's not make any claims until they retire. And still, or since all the players that are really in the running. Now, I did a video a while back about Rod Laver. A few of you probably saw that video. I said the question I posed, which is a legitimate question, notwithstanding the fact that I believe that Federer it's my personal belief that at this point in time, this moment, I can't say that the conclusion must be the same in, say, 5 years. I just don't know. It looks very likely that Rafael Nadal will catch him in Grand Slams if Roger can't win another one. I know that much. Rafa just needs to win, 3 more French Opens. Then you do have the lopsided nature of the Grand Slams for Nadal, though. But in any case, a lot of people just don't like to talk about the GOAT stuff. And we don't have to talk about it in GOAT terms. We don't have to talk about it. Wilson looks to be holding in the third game. I'm just comparing numbers. I'm just comparing some numbers. And one of the problems with this article, now this article is published in Metro UK. It's called The Revealing Numbers Behind Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic's Battle to Be the GOAT. So this is not, I'm not making a conclusion about GOATs. For those of you who are sensitive to that question, or for those of you who don't believe we should talk about. It's interesting, we just talked about the players as animals, but GOAT tends to be the most commonly cited animal in connection with tennis. Goats and bulls, but goats are actually very non-descriptive, right? It's just the acronym. I find it funny when people on Twitter sometimes they'll use the little icon, the little emoji of a goat when they're talking about Federer. And while it's okay to kind of refer to Federer as the GOAT or talk about GOAT in terms of the greatest of all time, I think using the picture is almost a little strange because goats are not very ferocious. They're not very great and fierce and ferocious animals. I don't consider them kind of models of, predatory prowess. But some of the numbers here were interesting. Steve Johnson has held fairly convincingly, and they're on serve 1-2 Medvedev to serve. Medvedev has taken the first set in Winston-Salem. Man, these guys will be tired at the U.S. Open, and I'm not sure how much of a break the tournament will give them. Probably will let them slip until, say, Tuesday. But, they might have them out there playing Monday. I haven't looked at the schedule. But the one problem with this article is that there is some premium placed on the extent to which a particular player, and they're doing a comparative analysis between Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. There's some emphasis placed on the extent to which each one of these players has beaten one of the other players. So, like wins against big three people in the course of winning a title or Grand Slams. Well, here's a stat for you. The number of Grand Slam titles when beating a member of the Big Four en route. So the number of times Djokovic has won 13 Grand Slam titles. In how many of those has he beaten a Big Four player en route? And we could ask the same thing about Nadal, same thing about Djokovic. Well, Djokovic has had to face a Big Four member in all 13 of his Grand Slam runs, all 13 of his Grand Slam victories. Well, Nadal has had to do it in 13 of his 17, which is 76%. Federer has done it in 8. Now, but what's the problem with this? Well, it's actually, those are the full numbers. But later they specify since 2008. Now, that to me is interesting because, of course, Federer's period of dominance was before 2008. I mean, by definition, Federer's not going to have as many of his Grand Slams involve the Big Four members because Federer preceded the Big Four, right? I mean, Rafa was on the scene pretty quickly. Djokovic was on the scene. Rafa was a contender pretty quickly. It took Djokovic a while to actually be a contender, and Murray was right around the same time. But of course, Federer. So in Federer's defense, this is a kind of skewed metric because, of course, Federer is not going to have to face Djokovic in the 2004 or face any member of the Big Four in the 2004, Aussie Open or in the 2004 Wimbledon. And now he did have to face Nadal there fairly early on, but the since 2008 really does disadvantage Federer's numbers in that respect. So there were some interesting numbers. And one of the comments that I got on Twitter, I said that, of course, Nadal's Masters 1000 titles, and he is it 33 now? 33 Masters 1000 titles, I believe. A lot of those are on clay. Well, and that's true. And the specific percentage, I'm not sure. I think it's right around 70%. And I should look this up, in fact. Jeffrey Kaufman, if you're out there, I think you were telling me this. You might have been. But yes, Jeff, you're out there. Jeffrey, excuse me. But of course, Federer's is a little bit lopsided too. He's got a lot on the hard courts and not many on clay at all. I don't think he has. I don't think he has a very respectable number of 1,000 level clay victories. Got the one French Open, of course, and the 5 final runs, which renders him by itself one of the clay greats. For those of you who believe that Federer is not a good clay player, well, he is. Nadal, of course, had 5 runs to the final at Wimbledon. So for those of you who think he's not a good grass player, and gosh, for a while, I tended to believe that he wasn't the greatest grass player. And I think it was my conclusion in that respect was distorted by that incredibly long slump that he had. It just couldn't do anything at Wimbledon. He's just over in Wimbledon. So it did seem, but this year he broke out of it. He did break out of it. So another interesting stat, the head-to-head in finals, that was one of the head-to-head between Djokovic and Federer and Nadal in Djokovic and Nadal and Federer and the different permutations in finals. That was one of the numbers that folks who criticized my prediction. Remember, I predicted that Roger Federer would win last Sunday. But betting-wise, in terms of the odds, I mean, I'm sure the odds were for Federer, given the history of Federer at Cincinnati, and particularly Federer versus Djokovic in Cincinnati. But one of the numbers that people who criticized me afterwards, of course, it wasn't sometimes people will criticize me after the fact. They don't actually make a prediction first and say, oh, look, I told you so. They'll wait till after the match and then say, Aaron, you were wrong. But of course, they were never right because they never stuck their neck out there. But or maybe they did. I'm not criticizing you. I want to get your criticisms. I want to learn more about these players. I'm always learning more about these players. But the one stat, and I did know about this, is the stat between Federer and Djokovic in well, first of all, in finals, in major finals in the 1,000s and 1,000 levels and the Grand Slams, and Djokovic leads Federer very substantially in the finals 13-6. Well, there again, Djokovic wasn't around in Federer's initial period of ascendance and domination, right? So it's a little hard to, and you know, Federer had his own people to deal with. Roddick was no slouch, folks. Roddick was going to be the next Pete Sampras. Go back and look at those Roddick matches. If it weren't for the greatest player of all time coming along, Roddick would have been a great. I mean, he was a fantastic player. So Federer had his own problems prior to the arrival of Djokovic and really Nadal, although Nadal was on the scene very quick. I mean, it was really, and Federer was losing to him pretty quick. He came on the scene and started beating Federer very quickly, but not to cite. I mean, he beat Federer. I think they're one of their first matches on clay. And then, of course, Federer evened out the score and started to beat Nadal, particularly on the other surfaces. But then, so in the head-to-head in and in terms of the other numbers, head-to-head in finals, Federer trails Nadal as well, 10-14. Nadal has beaten Federer in 14 finals. Federer has won against Nadal in 10 finals. And then Djokovic leads Nadal as well. So Djokovic is the one who leads in the finals. He leads against both Nadal and Federer in the head-to-head finals. We're not talking about goats. We're not talking about goats. If anything, we're talking about cats. I said before, Federer reminds me of a cat, a cheetah. Of course, if we're doing tennis players as animals, it's Rafael Nadal as a bull, of course. But I personally believe that Novak Djokovic is a hyena. Hello from Greece, Azor. Great to have you from Greece. Great to see you. Patrick Nelson says Roddick had the forehand, but his backhand was quite weak. True. He had the double fister. And, of course, he had the serve. A lot of people call him a serve bot, but at the Australian Open, wow, this is interesting. At the Australian, I didn't know this. Roger is 1-3 against Nadal in the Australian. Nadal has beaten Roger in the Australian hard courts 3 times. Federer has beaten Nadal once. He trails Djokovic as well at the Australian. And Nadal and Djokovic have only met once in the Australian Open, and Djokovic did win. Of course, at the French Open, that's really skewed in favor of Nadal. Interestingly, for Federer and Djokovic, they're 1-1 in French Open head-to-heads. At Wimbledon, you have 2-1. I mean, one of the problems here with Nadal is that you don't have much of an opportunity for Federer to meet him on the Wimbledon courts because Nadal hasn't had very deep runs. Federer performs relative to Nadal anyway. He performs very consistently and goes very deep at Wimbledon, and there's really not been much of an exception. I think there was a round of 16 exit one year maybe back there, but so at Wimbledon, Federer leads Nadal 2-1 in the head-to-heads. Djokovic leads Nadal 2-1 in the Wimbledon head-to-heads, and Djokovic leads Federer 2-1 in the Wimbledon head-to-heads. It's interesting. Djokovic does perform well at Wimbledon. It's very. I mean, it certainly contradicts. I remember I made a video a while back that was concerned with debunking the myth that says that you just need to be a serve bot to win at Wimbledon. Well, Djokovic is an example of someone who, listen, he served very well at Wimbledon this year, and he served well when he's virtually every time he's lifted that trophy. I mean, you have to serve well. It's not a devastating serve on the magnitude of a John Isner or even Roger Federer, to be honest, but he can hold his serve. He's serving well at Wimbledon this year. I do recall that. I do remember seeing that with my own 2 eyes, but under no possible stretch of the imagination would you ever call Novak Djokovic anything approximating a serve bot. And he is one of the people that has dominated at Wimbledon and performs very well on grass. Nadal, again, semifinalist at Wimbledon this year, 5-time finalist at Wimbledon. He's certainly not a serve bot either. Now, some of that is a product of the fact that they have slowed the courts down. Is it 100% perennial rye? Is that it? Well, of course, they're changing them all the time at Wimbledon. Potentially, the courts at Wimbledon were just a little faster this year. I'd be interested in your views on that. Sparata91 says, if Roger pulled out all the stops and was as tactically switched on as Novak, he would have more than 20 grand slams. Distinction between Federer on the one hand, we do have an age of the big 3 happening. We've got big 3, and that's something to be excited about. Folks, we've got the US Open coming up. The big 3, arguably the 3 greatest players in the history of tennis, are playing in the same tournament. And we get to watch them. But I do think that based on recent performances, and I'm watching Medvedev versus Johnson at the Winston-Salem Open right now. They're on serve 3-3 in the second set. Medvedev has taken the first set based on a single break. So the distinction is between the ability that Djokovic and Nadal on the one hand have to just generate that killer instinct, the fight. Roger has it, but he can't access it. He's having trouble accessing it, whether it's a personal problem, I don't know. But whether it's age, I don't know. I guess age is the 300-pound gorilla in the room. He's 37. And that's what I get from a lot of commenters, basically. You know, Aaron, he's 37. And I understand that. He's 37 years old. We can't expect him to perform as brilliantly as he did, say, in the first 10 months, I guess it was 8 months of 2017. We can't expect it from him forever. Certainly not forever. I had a comment the other day. It was interesting. What the person said was, Roger should retire and then come back. He should retire from tennis. In other words, at the end of 2018, retire, and then just take a little time off for a year or two, and then to take on, maybe it'll be a new set of big players at that point, but wouldn't that be something? Comes back when he's 39. But I don't think that's actually going to happen. But the point is, maybe he does need, I don't know. I'm reticent to say that he needs rest, because he got so much rest. I mean, he's just been rested relative to the other players who had to slog through the clay season and who have been playing consistently. Roger, like a Tsitsipas, for example. He plays a lot of tournaments. These guys, these scrappy players who are down here, scrapping in the streets in the 250 level tournaments, a couple challengers maybe, they play a lot of tennis. Now, Roger has exemptions. He doesn't need to play tournaments. Even the mandatory tournaments, he doesn't need to play. Yes, age is certainly the gorilla, Sparata. I do think age is the gorilla in the room to some extent. But we just have to enjoy Roger playing. He's still playing well. The cat-like player that we know and love is still here. He's still playing. He will still, in all likelihood, have a nice round of 5 matches, at Wimbledon. At the US Open. He will most likely, if I'm predicting. Now, I think he will most likely fall to Djokovic if he has to deal with Djokovic in that quarterfinal. But he will have a run into the quarterfinal, and we'll get to watch him play 5 matches. And during the course of those 5, and it's better than nothing, we'll get to watch him display that Federer beauty and brilliance for 5 matches. At this Grand Slam, the last Grand Slam of the year. Now, Medvedev has a break point. It's add Medvedev on the Johnson serve. And that would, oh my gosh, Medvedev just kissing the lines. And he converts it. Medvedev now up a break in the second set. Just millimeters have determined this break. There's a line challenge. The Steve Johnson ground stroke does sail out, and Johnson is broken. And unlike Rafael Nadal, unlike Novak Djokovic, I'm not convinced that Steve Johnson has the fight in him to roar back and break Daniil Medvedev, who looks very, very strong. Let's talk a little bit about Daniil Medvedev. Well, I was talking about him yesterday because we talked about Tsitsipas, and Tsitsipas and Medvedev had a run-in in Miami. And let's see. That was not right. There were some words exchanged between Medvedev and Tsitsipas in Miami. There's another Medvedev who's a politician. I want this one. Daniil Medvedev. Let's check him out. See, I mean, he did prevail over Tsitsipas in Miami, so that's a good sign. He going to check out his sort of titles and finals here. Only one title. In 2018, it was in Sydney. It's earlier this year. Let's see here. Do we have the record on that? No. But in terms of his, so he's been having a year, a respectable year. He's a young guy, 22. He's 6'6". He did strike me as a pretty large guy. I mean, he's very big, very thin, lean and mean. In terms of activities, I mean, he's looking like he's going to take his second title this year, folks. So Medvedev, need to take account of what's going on here with Medvedev. Let's look at his 2018 season. And he, of course, he had the Sydney run, beat Philipp Kohlschreiber on the way, Gerald Donaldson, Fabio Fognini, and then Alex de Minaur in the final. That was a 250 level tournament. And that was a 3-set match in which Minaur had breadsticks in the first, dealt out a breadstick in the first set. So that signals that Medvedev can come roaring back. He has that capacity. At the Australian, Medvedev defeated Kokkinakis. We all know Kokkinakis, the big Australian Thanasi Kokkinakis. Then he lost to Hyun Chung, who, of course, was on fire at the Australian Open, as we remember. At Rotterdam, has a fairly deep run into the quarterfinals, including a win over Gilles Muller, Nicolas Mahut. Not tons of great players on that run. He beat Steve Johnson. I didn't look at the head-to-head prior to this match. He did beat Steve Johnson at Indian Wells this year in the opening round to 128. Steve Johnson was ranked 52 at that point, and Medvedev came out on top in straight sets, 7-6, 6-4. Beat Tsitsipas in Miami, like I said. Beat Fucsovics in Monte Carlo. Didn't do great on clay. Basically losing in the first rounds on clay, although he did pull out a win against Jack Sock. Is it even impressive to beat Jack Sock, though? I don't think so. Oh, good Lord. Medvedev has created a championship point with an absolutely masterful volley or set of volleys at the net. That was beautiful. Definitely the better player on the court. No, I'm sorry. This has not been a championship point. I was getting ahead of myself. He is 5'3". He's on course to the championship, and he probably will get a championship point in this next game, possibly, because Johnson seems to be falling apart. He beat Borna Coric at Wimbledon and Garcia Lopez before falling to Manarino, who's a very good grass court player. Ask Roger Federer. Roger Federer will. Jack who? Exactly, Jeffrey. Jack who? Who the heck is that? I don't know. Never heard of the guy. And Medvedev took out Manarino. Lost to Manarino 4-6, 3-6, 6-4, 7-5, 3-6. Manarino, however, is quite good. Fell to Shapovalov in Washington. Talking about Medvedev's record, Medvedev looks to be on course to taking this title, his second title of the year, second career title at the Winston-Salem Open. In Toronto, he had a good run. Well, he was in the qualifying rounds, but those qualifying rounds did involve another win over Jack who? Yes, another win over Jack Sock. As well as a win over Felix Auger-Aliassime. That one, I don't know. Tennis was better in the 70s. Dream gods. Yes, tennis was better in the 70s. Tennis, I take that back. I know Dream Gods, so I think it's a funny comment. I mean, I grew up with the tennis. I'm older, probably some of you guys think. Maybe I do look my age. I'm not sure, but I am old enough to remember John McEnroe, and I was basically cultivated my love of tennis in the 1980s. That really does age me, doesn't it? But then Medvedev fell to Zverev in the round of 16 at the Rogers Cup. Okay. And that was a straight set loss. We have now 3 championship points for Medvedev. Like I said, he was going to do it on the Johnson serve, so he's going to break Johnson a second time. It's love 40. Johnson has missed his first serve. Medvedev now just can taste this second title of his career. He doesn't need to get it in this point. He nets a forehand, so he surrenders 1 of his championship points. He's got 2 more. And then in Cincinnati, Medvedev fell to Coric in the round of 64. Beat a couple of no-names in the qualifying round. So in any case, listen, he looks very solid today. Obviously, he's got that big frame. He's serving well. Now Medvedev has surrendered the second championship point. One of his forehands just sailed out. You play a little differently when you have 3 championship points than you do at other times in a match. But now he's down to his last championship point. Well, he doesn't care too much about breaking Johnson a second time. If he doesn't get this championship point, he's probably going to create a few more on serve next. He's already up a break. It's in the bag for him, folks. It's in the bag for him. Congratulations to Medvedev. In the interaction with Tsitsipas, and to be honest, I think Tsitsipas, and this was in Miami when Medvedev, I think, took out Tsitsipas in 3 sets. Johnson has now saved the 3rd championship point and is up to deuce on serve. So, hey, he's not going down easy. Let's do this, Johnson. So anyway, a pretty good season for Medvedev. Not bad. Not bad at all. There's been some wins in there. I mean, he could be on, have some kind of upward momentum. Johnson now is in the ad court and is poised to hold his serve. But like I said, Medvedev's up a break. And that break was not achieved by simply getting the ball back or pushing the ball or trying to make the opponent lose or preventing the opponent from losing the point. It was won with some really masterful volley play. Interesting stuff. Now oh my goodness. Now Steve Johnson seems to be coming alive. Listen, he's not been able to get into the Medvedev serve at all in the course of this match, but let's see if he can do it. If he can break Medvedev back, he's back in to the second set. But as it stands, Daniil Medvedev, whose serving numbers today are tremendous. As it stands, he will be serving for the championship, his 2nd title of his career. So congratulations to him. I hope he gets some rest before the U.S. Open. Neither of these guys will be big contenders in the U.S. Open, I don't think. Let's see where Medvedev is. Well, he'd probably have to do the qualifiers, right? Or actually, maybe not, because Steve Johnson's in the top half of the draw in the second quarter. He'll have to deal with Istomin and then probably with Dominic Thiem in the second round. It's not going to look pretty for him. He could possibly face Bautista Agut in the round of in the third round. Medvedev's down into the third quarter, third eighth, or third quarter of the top half, we could say. And Medvedev will be facing, we're talking about Medvedev's draw. Medvedev, who is on the cusp now of winning his 2nd title at Winston-Salem. He will have to play Evgeny Donskoy. Oh, I was talking about this yesterday. Well, I was talking about this yesterday, and Tsitsipas will likely be Medvedev's opponent. If Medvedev can get through Donskoy and Tsitsipas can get through the qualifier that he'll be playing in the first round, then there'll be a rematch with Medvedev and Tsitsipas. As I was saying before, they've had kind of a rough history, to be honest. Apparently, Tsitsipas, in a kind of a rare moment of, apparently he made a reference to Medvedev's nationality. And yes, we are lucky, Yaha, to watch the big three. We're so lucky. And what we need to do for the Fed fans, are you out there? What we need to do, I'm going to get this sun's coming in a little too bright. Well, now Johnson has got, as they say, a nose under the tent. He's got a little nose under the tent on the Medvedev serve. Johnson tries to lob over Medvedev. Medvedev has a lot of forward momentum in his game today, approaching a lot. I'll be interested to see the numbers on this, how often Medvedev was approaching and what his percentage was like at the net. He looks to be just impenetrable at the net. Steve Johnson struggling there to lob him, but it sails out. We are even now at 15 all. Medvedev is serving, if you're just tuning in, for the championship. Michael Walker, my buddy. The man that thinks, I think what you've said is that you think I'm biased. Well, I still like having discussions with you. But Michael Walker says, we had the big four in the 80s with Borg, McEnroe, Connors, and Lendl. True enough. See, you're probably closer to my generation, Michael. That's what I remember. That's the golden age in a way for me. I mean, the Federer era is different. I mean, what I was saying before, and one dimension of this has to do with the emotional control. The era of McEnroe and Connors, and notwithstanding how emotionally controlled and even-keeled Bjorn Borg was, and Lendl, but Connors, McEnroe, Nastase, they were irritable and would have outbursts on the court. Well, in so doing, as I was saying earlier, I mean, they basically lowered the standard. They lowered the standard, and that was a different era. But Roger Federer almost single-handedly ushered in a new era of tennis where the standard was raised. Federer raised the standard with respect to outbursts on the court. But putting that aside, I believe you're right. It was a golden age of sorts. There were some great players. But on the numbers, just on the numbers, we can probably distinguish between now and then, just on the numbers. Because look at, you got Djokovic, 13 Grand Slams. You have Federer, 20 Grand Slams. Nadal, 17 Grand Slams. We didn't have anything like that in the golden age. We had some great players, don't get me wrong. Now, Johnson has created a break point. His first break point of the match. I love tennis. Can he even this up? Or maybe he had a couple of break points. I'm sorry. Now, but he's got one more at least. Can he convert? No, this was his first one. He couldn't get back a very hard and accurate first serve on the part of Medvedev. So he fails to convert his first break point. He's 0% on break points. But nice fight, Johnson. Back down to deuce. He can do this. I'm kind of rooting for the underdog in a way. I like Johnson. I guess he's an American. I'm not really sort of patriotic with that kind of thing. I don't really care about the nationalities. A lot of people will mention that. Like, not a lot of people, but some people have mentioned. Okay, so Medvedev is now in the ad court on serve with a championship point. He's had he had a couple of championship points before, but was unable to convert those. Now he has a championship point. Is he just going to finish it out with an ace? Let's see here. There's a let, and he gets a first serve in. So this is happening in real time, folks. These are very solid players. But with respect to this comparison, it's a good one, Michael, because I love those players. Thank you, Michael. Well, we could have a philosophical argument about whether it's even possible to be not biased. Medvedev takes it, his second title of the year, with an overhead smash, as he did so many times in this tournament. He was impenetrable at the net. Steve Johnson appears to be very cordial. They're talking, they're shaking hands. It's a good feeling. This is a great feeling. Medvedev's talking a little more to Johnson. Everything's very cool. It's a kumbaya moment. Johnson's happy. He had a good performance, a very deep run in this tournament. And Medvedev's happy with his second title of the year. I'm not sure that makes him, a contender for the U.S. Open. We'll have to watch. He'll have to deal with Tsitsipas possibly in the second round, which could be pretty interesting, given, as I've said, their history. But who else will Medvedev have to possibly deal with? Well, Coric might have to deal with Coric, and he's lost to Coric. Coric could possibly be in the third round if he gets through Tsitsipas, provided Tsitsipas is there. And then if he were to land a spot in the round of 16, talking about Medvedev now, he might have to deal with Juan Martín del Potro, the tower from Tandil. Well, congratulations to Daniil Medvedev. Now, that's awesome. From what I saw, this guy was really turning out some brilliant tennis over the course of this tournament. I'm going to have to look a little closer at his draw. Again, he's got the big frame board, which I really don't understand because you are a grown, mature, intelligent man. Well, thanks. It's interesting, the people that criticize me for the bias, sometimes, like Michael, and I appreciate this, Michael, you'll kind of sneak in a little bit of a compliment. So thank you for the compliment. But we could have a philosophical discussion about whether bias is entirely avoidable here. I have been, certainly in the past, I have expressed a certain partiality for Roger Federer's style of play. But let's go back to if you want to call me biased, let's go back to my last prediction. My last prediction was that Roger Federer would win the Cincinnati Open and would beat Djokovic in the final. Now, was that biased? Was that a biased prediction? I don't think it was biased. Look at the history. Now, in finals generally, Djokovic does, in title matches, in other words, Djokovic does lead Federer in that head-to-head. But at Cincinnati, on those particular courts, Federer had disposed of Djokovic on every other occasion in the final. I don't know how you can call me biased in that connection for predicting Roger Federer would win. Now, if we go back further, and I'm going to just be completely honest with you on this, because, I've made other predictions too. And my predictions are always fairly soft because this is very much an unpredictable game. Another prediction, sometimes, and I will give you this, sometimes my predictions have incestuously intermingled with my hopes. That's true. I will give you that. And to that extent, that's a little bias. Let me repeat that since it was such a beautiful phrase. Sometimes my predictions, my purportedly scientific predictions, will incestuously intermingle. I like that. Incestuously intermingle with my hopes. And there was a little bit of that. So when I predicted that, and it was I'd have to go back and watch that video. I think I might have suggested a prediction that Dominique Thiem could win that French Open final. And I got a lot of blowback from that for that. And what I did, in fact, in the video, in my defense, and I have to defend myself. Hello, Turkey. Nice to see you here. Well, I don't mean to call you a turkey. I mean the country you're from. Greetings, Turkey. It's great to have you here. I'm so glad we have an international crowd. This is Tennis Talk Daily, live, uncut. Totally uncut. Well, we don't use profanities, but it's totally uncut. It's rough and uncut. You see, right there was a mistake, and we left it in. Totally uncut, just for you. But I laid out, when I talked about Thiem winning, when I argued that Thiem could win, because that's all I really argued. I said, Dominique Thiem can win this. And here's how. That was how it kind of was articulated. So if you go back to that video and examine what I say, it's basically that if Thiem does this and this and this, there were a couple of requirements. If Thiem can do these things, then I believe he can win. And Thiem didn't do those things. And he, in a way, kind of choked in that match. But at the same time, I don't want to take any credit away from Nadal, because he's just a master of the 5-set context on the red dirt. Hello, Saudi Arabia. Fantastic to see you. Hello, Montreal, Canada. Awesome to see you. Well, I know Jeffrey Kaufman. Well, I'm not sure what that means, David. Remind me who Bill Burr is. Now I feel like I should know who Bill Burr is. Is he an Australian guy? I'm not sure. But so, in that respect. Now, on the other hand, other people give me a hard time. For example, after Roger won the Rogers Cup, by the way, we're in the ceremony here for the Winston-Salem Open. Daniil Medvedev, the 22-year-old Russian, is about to lift his second trophy of the year. We'll see what the trophy looks like. I hope it's better than Cincinnati. Did anybody notice this? That the Cincinnati trophy is it's pottery. It's not a trophy. It's pottery. We have to make distinctions. Oh, Bill is a comedian from Boston. Well, that shows you how much I get out, David. We need to have a beer, David. We need to have 3 beers. Medvedev looked very solid here, folks. I mean, I'm so impressed with him, but I was really impressed by Steve Johnson. And let me also just say, and I like when I see this, when they came up to the net and shook each other's hands at the end of the match. Yeah, very expensive pottery, sure. But what I was saying on Twitter, Michael, is that, well, thank you, David. If Bill Burr is a Bostonian comic and he's world class, well, I'm not purporting to be a comic here at all. I'm just purporting to provide tennis talk and to talk about tennis, which is the sport that I love above all sports. Why? Accountability. That's why. Accountability. There's no one to blame. You can't pass the buck in tennis. Even Sunday, and people blame me for making excuses for Roger, making excuses for anybody. No, I don't make excuses for anybody, because you know what? They are entirely responsible for the results that they achieve in those matches or fail to achieve in those matches. I don't know why I'm not seeing a readout on the chat. It just disappears. We are well into the 3rd hour of live, uncut tennis talk on Tennis Talk Daily in advance. This is technically a U.S. Open preview show. Does the Medvedev win over Johnson even matter? Well, thanks, Patrick. It's great to have you. You're part of what makes it great, okay? But we need to get more people in this party. Got to get a lot more people in this party. Well, next week is going to be awesome. Next week is going to be truly awesome. All right. Next 2 weeks. Next 2 weeks, it's heaven. It's heaven. And it's heaven because you know what? With Roger, it's heaven notwithstanding the fact that Roger is not the favorite. David says Roger Federer has done more tennis than all of those combined. Well, has done more tennis, has more for tennis. Yes. It's true. What he's done for the game. That's a great way of thinking about it. Not just the records, what he's done for the game. And David, I've said this a couple of times now in this episode, but one of the things that he did for the game, which is important and good and admirable and just something that it's very admirable that he stands for this. And his recent conduct is kind of problematizes this a little bit. This grumpy old goat concept. I love Matt over at Coffee Break Tennis, and I even agreed with him for a while that that being a little grumpy could be good. And I've stated that in previous episodes. But I have reversed myself on that point. I don't want Federer grumpy. I don't want him emotional. I don't want him upset. We need to go back to the stolid, serene Federer. He can do it, and really that's what he's been doing. He knows that being grumpy doesn't help. Did being grumpy help him in Indian Wells? Did being grumpy help Federer at Indian Wells, folks? No, it didn't. Michael is saying, while I was online, you were watching Tsitsipas. He was on court 11 hitting with Monfils. Good. Both look very good. Thanks for that update. I heard that Roger was out on the practice courts. Medvedev now lifting the trophy. Is it a trophy or is it pottery? Or is it some other bowl? Trophy is a very expandable term. I remember when Roger became #1 at Rotterdam. You remember they put together that cardboard? There was some cardboard quasi trophy that they put together for him at Rotterdam that was just totally embarrassing. On the other hand, the Queen's Club trophy, man, that thing is massive. I mean, the Queen's Club, I think that's got to be one of the biggest trophies on the tour. But the pottery is not impressive. Djokovic was talking about lifting his trophy at Cincinnati. Well, not really. You kind of just lifted a pot. But the best thing to do with that, I think, is you just put it right on the dinner table. Put some flowers in it. There it is, the Golden Masters. Put a few daisies. It's a beautiful table ornament. Well, people are talking about Monfils. Jeffrey Kaufman, will Roger be hitting with Djokovic? Well, there was some information that came to me from one of our loyal followers here at Tennis Talk Daily, Robert Ferguson, the real nice guy. And he said he was watching some of these practice sessions with Roger today, I believe, and that Roger was hitting all sorts of junk during practice. Queens, Barcelona, Beijing, and Queens are the Queens are biggest trophies in tennis. Yeah. The big ones are nice. I mean, what can I say? I mean, when I think of a trophy, I think of metal. I think of something metallic. I don't think of pottery. I don't know. I mean, I suppose anything can be a trophy. I think, again, it's kind of an expandable term. But Medvedev's got his second trophy, and I still haven't identified what it is, whether it's a dish, a plate. But he looks to be a real nice guy. I wanted to repeat, too, that when these two came to the net, there was just such a nice feeling of collegiality. It's kind of rare that you see that with the tennis players. I would say more often than not, is probably an understatement. I could probably say 85, 90% of the times when they meet at the net for the handshakes, it's pretty cold. It's pretty cold. I mean, they're not, as I've said before, they're not chummy. Most of them are not chummy. And I gave an example, even Stan and Roger. For those of you who know about Mercagate, when Merca blurted out, I think it was at the finals, in 2015, maybe 2014. Merca apparently blurted out on the court something kind of derogatory about Stan. But the very fact that she said anything suggests that, there was a lot of sort of dinner table conversation, and that she and Roger were had been talking a lot about it, and probably both of them agreed, because why would she, again, blurt that out if she thought that Roger wasn't supportive of it? I'm sure they both kind of bad talk Stan. And they're countrymen. I mean, they should be good friends, right? It kind of worked together a lot, but no. So it's very rare. But in any case, Medvedev and Johnson came to the net. It was just a very collegial, harmonious handshake. Medvedev, 88% on his first serve points, wins less than half of his second serve points. There's a couple other stats there. He was able to edge out Johnson. But my comment about Medvedev is really a comment that suggests that his play is kind of Federer-esque in a way, because he had a lot of forward momentum in this match. And he approached, that's the stat I wanted to see. I'm going to have to dial it up later, but he approached a lot. And his percentage on the approaches in terms of his win percentages at the net, very solid. I imagine. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like 80, 75, 80%, maybe 90%. I'll have to check the numbers, but that's a very positive part of Medvedev's game. And again, Federer-esque, something I like. For those of you tuning in, Daniil Medvedev has won his second title at Winston-Salem, but this is really a U.S. Open preview show. If you guys want to talk about anything with respect to the U.S. Open, let me know. But in the main, we'll have some interesting matches in the opening round. I mean, probably the most interesting match in the opening round of the U.S. Open will be the Stanimal, Stan Wawrinka versus Grigor Dimitrov in the first round. It's just a product of Stan's, strange ranking. He's beginning to be a player that deserves a better ranking. Let's just kind of put it that way. He's beginning to kind of warrant a higher ranking in connection with his play. He's very much impressed me at Cincinnati. If it weren't for Federer pretty much turning on the big guns, kicking it into high gear, in a way, that's one good thing and positive thing about Cincy. There was that final set with Stan. For those Fed fans out there that have no faith, well, there was that final set with Stan when Federer, at the end of a day where he had to play 2 full matches, mind you, in the final set, having dropped the first set to the very fierce and consistently playing Stanislav Wawrinka, countryman, whom Roger Federer's wife does not like. Well, didn't Nick Kyrgios say something about Stan too? Apparently Stan likes to sleep with the underage girls. He came back. He was able to win the second set, but it was in the third set that Federer really kicked it into high gear. The final set of a day that involved 2 full matches, and Federer was able to dig down deep and really produce some fantastic play. That gave me a lot of confidence. Now, when he came out against Goffin the next day, and he kind of got a pass with Goffin, didn't he? Came out against Goffin the next day and wasn't displaying the same caliber of play that he was displaying in that final set with Stan, and he didn't have to ultimately in the end because Goffin retired. Actually, it's not Goffin. Apparently, there's no N at the end of Goffin's name. It's Goffin. Goffin. Thank you, LSB, who I don't think has joined us today quite yet. Let's see, what are folks talking about? Halle isn't even a tough 500 a 1,000 is a mandatory tournament that everyone has to play it. Yes, but if you're talking about Roger, Roger has exemptions. He doesn't have to play any tournament, nor does Rafa. Once you're on the tour for so long, there's a certain set of criteria that's in the ATP rules, and you get an exemption. Kokkinok has banged your girlfriend is what was uttered. Kokkinok has banged your girlfriend. So that was what was uttered to Kyrgios said that to Stan. Is that right? Kyrgios is something else. He's got loose lips. We should call him Nick Loose Lips Kyrgios. He's got loose lips, and I thought what he said about Tsitsipas the other day was kind of disrespectful, even though in the entire context of the statement, it was pretty clear that what he meant was he's got work to do. But I found it a little strange because Nick Kyrgios has never even played Tsitsipas. And then, as I was saying before, I had a viewer come on and say, well, Aaron, you haven't played Tsitsipas either, so how can you conclude he's good? Well, let's give Tsitsipas the benefit of the doubt. If you haven't played against the guy, Nick, for crying out loud, give him the benefit of the doubt. He did come through 4 top 10 players in a row, knocking them down like dominoes. Maybe that's a little intense. They were rough matches. It's always ugly in this game, isn't it? Particularly with Novak Djokovic. It seems to be it's always just ugly. He never does it in a pretty way, Djokovic. It's always just ugly in the end. But you know what? He gets the trophies. He lifts trophies. You have to admire the guy, you know? Well, I said yesterday, I got a couple of comments on this, that possibly Federer is a little maybe too concerned about his image and what he looks like and being aesthetically pleasing. Since, again, that's part of the pressure that's on Federer. You know, even people like Richard Krajicek, who believe that Djokovic is the more complete player, will concede that Federer is the most beautiful player. It's like, in that sense, I mean, if you're talking about the most beautiful GOAT, Federer's definitely the most beautiful GOAT. And even the Nadal fans and maybe Djokovic fans would agree with that. Well, probably not. They don't like to give much. They don't like to give much, an inch to Federer, but at least some of them don't. But what I was saying the other day is maybe Federer is like a little, maybe he's concerned about the extent to which his play is aesthetically pleasing, the extent to which he kind of looks good. His appearance is in keeping, because he does look good. It's beautiful to watch him. His outfit, perfectly tailored. He's just all perfect. And I was not worried about that. He's worried about one thing: preventing the opponent from winning the point. That's what he's worried about. And he doesn't care what he looks like doing it. Nadal, kind of same thing. And Nadal's starting, you got the bald spot. He's starting to be quite honest, I was happy for Rafael Nadal when he won the Rogers Cup. Definitely deserved the title, but he didn't look great. I mean, he's starting to show his age. They're all starting to show their age. But I will say this about Federer. Again, he looked great. He didn't, I wouldn't, I mean, remember in Indian Wells, he grew out the stubble, and he just didn't look good. He kind of bloated or something and had the stubble. He didn't look, he looked his age. I remember thinking, wow, he looked his age. And when he lost the final, it's like, man, I mean, it's almost like in that one, you're more likely to blame his age for that, because he just didn't really look good. I think he did he shave for the final ultimately? Because he was all stubbly in Indian Wells. It just didn't look good. He looked all unkept. And you couple that with the fact that he was not in control of his emotions during that tournament, that he wasn't playing so well either, at least after the match with him. I did a video a while back that was entitled something like "The Last Sighting of Roger Federer." That was before grass. And the last sighting of Roger Federer at that point in time, maybe it was in April or something, was the match with Chung at Indian Wells. After that, the Coric match, he wasn't himself. He won the Coric match after dropping the first set, but he just wasn't himself. So But I do agree with a lot of commenters that Del Potro match, the Del Potro match is the big trauma. The Del Potro match at Indian Wells is really the big trauma that we can trace a lot of these problems with Federer back to, I think. What a devastating match. Has to be one of the three most frustratingly strange and just twisty-turny matches and ultimately disappointing matches for the Federer fans of the year. But yeah, I think Federer is just, he has to get his mental game together, folks. It's a mental thing with him. I really believe this. Something's going on mentally. It's not about his age. I don't think it's about his age. I think physically speaking, fitness-wise, Federer's capable of winning the U.S. Open. The fitness is not holding him back. It's the mental game that's holding him back. It's the footwork that's holding him back. But that's more, I guess that's kind of like a reflex thing, hand-eye, the coordination. And maybe you can trace that back to the age, to be honest. I'm not sure. But listen, I've said it before. I will say it again. If Roger can push through the quarterfinal, can push through Djokovic in this quarterfinal, he will win the U.S. Open and lift his 21st trophy. But the main point with respect to Roger, and this is dedicated to all of the Federer fans out there, and the point is that just as we believe, when I say we, just as the Fed fans believe that Roger needs to relax and have fun. That's a comment I've been getting a lot. Roger needs to kind of relax a little bit. He's uptight. He's tense. In the same way that we're saying, well, you should say that to yourself too. We should all relax. Let's enjoy Roger's game. Let's show him through our attitude with respect to his tennis. Let's provide a model which is not so uptight, which is go in there, do your best, don't get down about it. Just go in there and do your best and no worries, A quarterfinal run at the U.S. Open is fine. If he's out in the third round, well, then the Fed fans probably do have some problems. But heck, he would have, if he's out in the third round at the hands of Nick Kyrgios, I mean, that's not such a mark against him. But as I said before, Kyrgios doesn't have a great record at the U.S. Open. I suppose you could argue that I'm overestimating the threat of Kyrgios in the third round. I think it doesn't, no matter how much of a threat that we estimate Kyrgios to be, Federer's draw prior to the semifinals looks harder than Nadal's and looks harder than just about everyone else's, to be honest. He got a kind of a difficult, but it's the Kyrgios piece. Of course, the quarterfinals is the real problem for him, the Djokovic threat in the quarterfinals. But on the other hand, I've said it before, we should be happy that Roger is getting a difficult draw. We should be happy that he's getting a rematch with Djokovic. And this, when I say we should be happy, it's Fed fans should be happy. Roger wants another crack at Nole. Roger wants another crack at Djokovic. Now, he's going to get it most likely. And Roger has fallen to Djokovic a couple of times at the U.S. Open. I don't know what those specific numbers are. Obviously, based on the history, Roger had a better chance ex ante, meaning prior to the match, he had a better chance in Cincinnati based on that, again, very impressive record that he had against Djokovic in particular at Cincinnati. He doesn't have those kind of numbers against Djokovic coming into the U.S. Open. Of course, he doesn't have that long streak of service holds at the U.S. Open. He was broken last year, of course. In fact, I think he was broken in one of the early rounds. He had to play a couple of long matches fairly early. He was all out of sorts right at the beginning of the U.S. Open last year, but we'll know pretty quick. Listen, He's probably going to have to face the bearded racket smasher madman. I'm going to stop calling him a racket smasher. I don't love the racket smashers. I wish they'd stop. But you don't think Roger wants to face Djokovic, Jeffrey? Well, I think he does. And, you know, in defense of Djokovic too, when I said in that video on the Cincy final, when I said that Roger had a bad day at the office, another thing I was thinking about is yet another way to distinguish between Federer and Nadal, say. Nadal doesn't really have bad days at the office, does he? Isn't that the difference? I mean, with Nadal, it's like he's either injured now. Maybe you could argue, you know, I don't know. He did have at the Australian Open, he did have the injury issue. Was it the match with Cilic, I believe? But that was a legitimate injury. I think with Nadal, I mean, he doesn't have bad days at the office. Federer is having bad days at the office. Djokovic has bad days at the office. He's capable too. I think Nadal kind of stands alone. He doesn't really have bad days. Does he? You Nadal fans, let me know. Is that the wrong proposition? I know I got a lot of Fed fans out there too, but Nadal doesn't really, that's part of what is so impressive and mind-blowing about Rafael Nadal. He doesn't have bad days at the office. Whereas Federer has demonstrated. Now, the only real good evidence that we have of Federer having bad days is the Djokovic match. I don't think we can call Federer's match with Kevin Anderson at Wimbledon a bad day at the office. It was just the chips fell where they did, given that strange rule about the no tie breaks. And I think in the end, Federer was not going to suffer the indignity at this point in his career of just going on and on and on in a final set tiebreak at Wimbledon. And so some part of believes that maybe it wasn't intentional, maybe it was kind of indirect, but I think he made a decision that, you know, I'm not going to play past about 11 or 12 here. I'm just not doing this. We're not going to stay out here. It's going to end, and it'll have to, if you have to win, Mr. Anderson, in order to end this, well, then that's what we'll do. And I think that's basically what Federer, I mean, I couldn't really imagine Roger Federer at that point in his career just going on and on and on like Isner, you know, to game like 25, 26, 20. No, he's not going to do that. He's just going to surrender his serve for all intents and purposes. Now, I'm not saying that Federer surrendered his serve in the final set tiebreak to Anderson and to give him the win. No, I'm just saying that Federer, he played in a certain way. Of course, he was getting exhausted. It was just, that was, oh my God, that was almost as much of a nightmare for Federer fans as the Del Potro, but in a way, similar matches, right? Or was it 4? It was 4 match points. I think it was 3 match points. Championship points, to be specific. And then with Anderson, it was winning the first 2 sets. 2 sets to 0, and then he goes on to surrender the match to the big serving South African Kevin Anderson, who was talking yesterday about how many Twitter followers each of these players has, and I doubt if Kevin Anderson has many Twitter followers. Yes, culture and sport. Nadal is crazy solid. He doesn't have bad days at the office. He doesn't have bad days at the office. And that's what separates him from the pack. The bull. We were talking about all these players in terms of animals. Federer is the cat. Nadal's the bull. Djokovic the hyena. Zverev. The problem is that Tsitsipas isn't a lion. He's the puppy dog, remember? I was talking earlier about how 2 players in particular, Tsitsipas and Coric, the way they return their serves, for those of you tuning in, they look like puppy dogs. And I think I'm here to say that it's a little bit inappropriate to look like a puppy dog when receiving a serve, and it's not necessary. Having played a lot of tennis myself, I know you need to be alert, but all that kind of exaggerated stuff. The other one I mentioned was Carreño Busta, who puts his left hand on his knee sometimes when he's returning serve. It's really funny. It works. Didn't work against Steve Johnson last night, but for those of you tuning in, Daniil Medvedev has won his second title of his career. Some of you probably don't even know who he is, which is the reason we're mainly talking about Djokovic and Federer. But we did give a little coverage there. It's some interesting play going on. Medvedev had a lot of forward momentum in his point construction at Winston-Salem and was just very impressive. Michael Walker, good night. Great to have you. Thanks for coming on, my friend. And thanks for your comments. So, yes, we're probably going to close this out, friends. We've been on for, let's see, about 2 hours and 40 minutes. I love doing these live streams with you guys. Love your comments. And I love talking about tennis. I disagree, Jeffrey, about Federer not wanting to play Djokovic. I disagree. No, he wants to face down Djokovic. No question about it. At this point in his career, no. He's not trying to avoid Djokovic. Not at this point. He knows he can beat Djokovic, and he's poised to do so, to be honest. I think he can redeem against Djokovic. Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot more, Patrick Nielsen, and it's going to get a lot better once this U.S. Open starts. Then we're going to get super exciting, and I love talking with tennis, talking about tennis with you. Thanks for joining us. I think we're going to wind it down for now. But yeah, me too. Listen, the U.S. Open this year, it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal draw. Again, I think it's the perfect draw for Federer, folks. I love the fact that he's playing Djokovic early. He needs to get got unfinished business with Djokovic. Okay, he's got unfinished business with Djokovic. He wants, and I respectfully disagree with Jeffrey Kaufman. I think he wants another crack at Djokovic. Maybe it would go too far to say he's salivating for Djokovic. Maybe that's not the proper metaphor, but he wants another crack at Djokovic. He knew that his feet weren't moving well, but you know, the excuses with him, I'm sick of making excuses. I don't make excuses for Roger Federer, but I'm sick of him making excuses, to be honest. But he ultimately doesn't really make excuses. He cites things like my feet weren't working well. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. My footwork wasn't working. No, that's not a good excuse, because the question is why? Why isn't your footwork working? It's such a central component of a person's game, particularly Federer. Well, you know, he's accountable. He is responsible totally and fully. Well, you're saying hopefully Halep wins the U.S. Open. I don't know. Well, if she does, and if I watch her, I'm going to turn the volume down because she just shrieks. She hollers on the tennis court. My ultimate conclusion about the grunting, I did a video a while back on grunting in men's tennis, but the real problem, to be honest, is in the women's on the women's side. They're the ones who do the truly over the top grunting. She screams. I mean, she screams, but in a way, I would rank her as worse than Nadal, to be quite honest. Nadal's kind of I guess it's the lower tonality or something. It just doesn't cut as much as those shrieks. And she's not the only women's tennis player. Martina Navratilova there's somebody. The grunting has come into fashion as of late. It wasn't a part of the game to as large of a degree as it is now, back in, say, the 80s. And Rafa, I will On the men's side, Rafa and Djokovic, they're two people who have operated to normalize the grunting. I'm not going to go off on a big thing about grunting because ultimately I conclude that if we're going to sort of pick our battles with respect to grunting, we should first fix the problem of grunting with the women because that's the real problem. We got a couple of problems on the men's side. I mean, I would say Hal Sosa over the top. There's a couple of other guys who are sort of over the top. Nadal pushes it. Nadal pushes it sometimes. He pushes the envelope. But sometimes he goes over the top. It depends on his mood. But the real problem with the grunting and with all of the, I think, inappropriate screaming on the court is on the women's side. So in a way, we should fix the problem there. And there, of course, you have Martina Navratilova, one of the greatest players of all time, calling the grunting a form of cheating. And I actually, when I watched the Tsitsipas versus Sosa final, I think that was Estoril, was it? Tsitsipas versus Sosa, and Sosa wasn't final. Maybe it was the semifinal. Yes, it was. And Sosa was just so loud. And he seemed to be, it's like a form of bullying. It was like bullying on the court. Muguruza has a bad one. Yeah, that's right. Virginia, nice. Federer is your favorite to win the U.S. Open. Well, I welcome your optimism. I think if you do the science and the math, kind of the objective way that so many people want me to stick to, they want the objective analysis. And I give you objective analysis. I give you personal points of view and perspectives. We do not only objective analysis here, but also perspectival analysis. But I don't think the hard numbers in the recent history support your view, Virginia, but I like your optimism. And you know what? You can never count Roger Federer out. And given the different set of circumstances, Heike, you're calling me drunk as hell? Am I like slurring my words? I don't think I'm slurring my words. I'm not drunk. I'm drinking coffee. Or maybe you're calling one of your fellow commenters drunk. So I'm not sure I can totally back you. So in terms of Federer being, he's not my favorite to win. But I will say this, and I've said it a couple of times now, it's an important point. If he can push through Djokovic, if Djokovic is playing well, if Federer beats him fair and square, lands a spot in the semifinal, where he will have to deal with either Cilic, maybe Goffin, or Zverev, maybe even Nishikori. Most likely Cilic, hopefully Goffin, since I really like Goffin. He's my favorite double fister on the tour, certainly among the lost generation folks. But if he can land a spot in the semifinal by getting through Djokovic, he will become my favorite to win the tournament. Now, that's barring something exceptional happen with Djokovic. Again, Djokovic has to be playing well. Federer has to beat him fair and square. I don't require that he beats Kyrgios in the third round. In other words, Kyrgios could strike out in an early round and Federer might be excused from having to deal with them. I don't require that. But if Djokovic loses in an early round and Federer is able to then push through into the semifinals, that doesn't mean he's the favorite, because it won't be so indicative about his play. If he can push through Djokovic, he's done. He's adjusted. He's adjusted if he can do that. And if Djokovic is playing well, I think Federer can do it, folks. I think he wants. Jeffrey Kaufman said, Federer doesn't want to play with Djokovic. I think you were just trying to push my buttons a little bit. I understand. But I do think Federer is capable of beating Djokovic, and I think he may very well do it. He's got something to prove with respect to Djokovic. He's got something to prove, and when Federer has something to prove, well, sometimes he rises to the occasion, doesn't he? I mean, that in a way, we're down to the crux of the matter, because that's where Federer has been sort of foundering in those key moments. Can he deliver when it matters most? And the answer has been too often no. Whereas the answer with respect to Djokovic, scrappy Djokovic, who dropped a set in all of his matches prior to the final except one in Cincinnati. He dropped the set. So, I mean, those were competitive matches. He had to fight. He got broken. He's getting broken all over the place. Again, holding serve is not as central of a component to Djokovic's game as it is Federer's game. That's definitely the truth because, you know, Djokovic is the best returner. I mean, his game is predicated on breaks of serve. Breaks of serve, that's how he does it. He doesn't tend to do it in the tie breaks. But it'd be an interesting number to look at. But something tells me that Djokovic has not had to fight through as many tie breaks. I would surmise, I don't know this for a fact, and you can let me know, I would surmise that Djokovic has not had to fight through as many tie breaks in the Grand Slams and 1,000 levels as Federer probably, and as Nadal as well. The reason being that Djokovic breaks. He breaks serve. That's how he wins. He also gets broken, but he breaks more than he gets broken. That's the truth, and that's why he wins. It's impressive. We love Djokovic. We love the fact that he has risen up again and is flying high. And I have nothing but respect for the fact that having gone to the depths, having basically sunk to a very lackluster level of play as a result of injuries, also as a result of some psychological issues, and then rising up, well, and then working his way back. That's what I respect about him. That's why I respect Stan too. You know, Stan has had to do that as well. He's had to suck for a while. Really. And that's kind of what Djokovic had to do as well. He just kind of had to suck for a while, but he pushed through. And for a while there, you know, people were wondering whether Djokovic could come back, whether Djokovic would ever be the player that he was, say, in 2015. Well, Rafa Nadal came out the other day and said, in response to this issue, I think he said something to the effect of, tennis is like riding a bike. You never forget how to win. And it's kind of the muscle memory and it's kind of just the psychological approach that Djokovic has. He has it wired into him, and you never forget how to win, according to Nadal. And that's what explains Djokovic coming back. Sparata 91, great to have you. Adios. A pleasure to have you. Thanks for your comments. Patrick Nelson says 2014 was a great chance for Roger, but Cilic was exceptional in that match. Roger didn't have a chance. Oh, exceptional is actually kind of an understatement. Man, Cilic, just unstoppable. The unstoppable Croat, raining down from on high, those forehands. Oh, my God. Talk about, and I think Federer was in black. Was Federer in black that year? I'm not sure if it was Darth Federer or not. But we'll see what he comes at in the U.S. Open this year. Of course, there was something of a Darth Federer on display in Cincinnati, although it might have been a darkish blue rather than a black. It was blue. He was blue for Cilic. Yeah, I remember him being in a darker. He wanted, when he was called Darth Federer, because that was earlier. I think that was like 2000. That was quite early in Federer's career. He did the Darth Federer. He was called Darth Federer in New York, and I think he wanted to avoid that. So his way of avoiding that is to, when he dresses in the dark solid color, he'll just make it a bluish. Navy blue is better. That way they won't call me Darth Federer. He's worried about his image. He's not overly worried about his image, but that's one concern that Federer has, his physical appearance, because he's known for the beauty. He's known as the most beautiful tennis player, and that's one set of expectations he has to uphold. He has to prove that he's worthy of that title, being the most beautiful tennis player, the most aesthetically pleasing tennis player. And I just wonder, does that cramp his style sometimes? Because Djokovic and Nadal don't care what they look like, right? They don't care. They just want to win. Or in the case of Djokovic, he wants to prevent the other player from winning the point and by default win the point himself. They don't care what they look like to some degree. But Roger, I think, has a greater concern based on that reputation. But in any case, no, that's a crazy memory. Listen, has Cilic even has the Cilic of 2014 come out again? Has that Cilic ever come out again? Because that Cilic was like unstoppable. That good. He was kicking butt against Djokovic again. He won a set against Djokovic in Cincinnati, and I was very impressed with his ground strokes. Very impressed with Cilic. Oh, he's got impressive ground strokes, particularly the forehand, but he was dictating play. Djokovic had to do a lot of defense, which is what he does best, and that's why he comes out on top. He's a tenacious and virtually unbreakable defender. He's just a defensive machine. Novak Djokovic, wow, the Wimbledon champion. For some, the favorite coming into the U.S. Open. For some, the favorite. Cilic dominated Nishikori in the final that year. It was 6-3, 6-3, 6-3. Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, Cilic was just unstoppable that year. There was just something running through his veins, and which is kind of suggestive. I don't mean to say he was taking drugs. It was just the energy running through his veins. Something tells me he has had an issue. Didn't he get an accusation about that? About some... Didn't he? I mean, oftentimes they're accused and it gets resolved. But he was just totally unstoppable at the U.S. Open in 2013. Well, in a way, we do want that Cilic back. I'm a fan of Marin Cilic. I like Marin Cilic. I really do. I mean, I like the way I like his approach. I just like his play. I mean, put aside the double fister, put aside that kind of the surface motion I don't love. None of these guys are as beautiful as Federer, So again, but tennis is not all about beauty, so it really doesn't matter. But in terms of the power, consistency, Cilic is up there, and he had a great year last year, right? In the final of Wimbledon, and then final of the 2018 Australian. Yeah. Cilic is a strong contender. And if, there's a potential semifinal lined up here at the U.S. Open between Cilic and Djokovic. If Djokovic can get through Federer in the quarterfinal, then you might have, and provided Cilic can get the better of Goffin, or maybe Zverev if he has to in the quarterfinals. If Cilic is into that semifinal against Djokovic, it's not a foregone conclusion that Djokovic then has a steeper climb into the final. Now, Cilic was able to edge Djokovic at Queen's Club in their a fairly recent meeting, but then, of course, Djokovic was able to redeem in Cincinnati. I don't think they met in the interim. So, Cilic has some unfinished business with Djokovic. Cilic is capable of beating Djokovic, folks. So that could be a really interesting semifinal as well. Well, we have talked so much, and it's been so great to have you guys. I am going to sign off momentarily. I got to have some dinner. Got to rest a little bit. But do join me tomorrow for some live streaming. Yeah, tomorrow I'll be on. It's generally going to be in the later afternoon. I can put some advertisements up to little taster videos or directing you for the appropriate times of these live streams. But it's going to get a lot of fun next week. Lots of fun. We're going to have the matches going, and we are going to be working it all out, figuring it all out as it happens. So excited for the U.S. Open. May the best player win, and I mean that. Awesome. It'll be great to have you. Have a wonderful evening. Best wishes. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.